Our agenda, I just wanted to make sure that council is aware that this last Thursday, we had the first event that has ever happened in the town of Stony Plain. Got your interest now, eh? We had the trifecta of outdoor activities last Thursday. That's the first time in the history that we've had 3 events. We had the Midsummer Thursday outing on downtown Main Street. We had the cultural campfire, which is also down in Chicago, an outdoor event. And we also had the outdoor movie. So the first time in the history of Stony Plain that we had 3 outdoor events in the same evening. So that's something that we can, a good trivia question when you want to ask those kids 20 years down the road, what was the first 3 activities that happened? So just a kind of neat fact. Council, you guys have an agenda? Deputy Mayor, for the motion, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll move that Town Council adopt the August 22nd, 2022 regular council meeting agenda as presented.
Okay, thank you. Administration, anything to add?
No, Your Worship, nothing at this time.
Okay. With that, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Okay, and that's carried. Moving on, number 3 of our agenda is the public input session. This is where we allow any member of the community to speak to council about anything that's not on the current agenda. Administration, has anybody submitted anything?
Your Worship, no one registered.
Okay. Since there's no submissions, is anybody in the audience that'd like to address council on anything that's not on the current agenda tonight? Okay, I see none. Thank you. We're moving on to number 4, which is presentations and delegations. Today we have 1 presentation, and it is with our inspector for the very last time. Welcome to our council chambers again, Inspector.
Thank you. Is this on already, or do I have to?
It's on.
Okay.
You just have to speak into the mic directly. Just, yeah.
Okay, good evening, everyone, and thank you for inviting me this evening. First, I'll go over the stats that have been, my understanding, presented to you ahead of time. And as I always preface these stats with, they're looking very good. Fortunately, in my time here, they've always looked very good. Everything typically comes down. There are trends where they go up and down, but as you can see over the 5-year term, there is a downward trend in almost everything. And so I would suggest that that's the more accurate depiction of statistics is the long term, not just last year versus this year. That said, the last couple of years have been somewhat of an anomaly because of COVID and different other factors that aren't usually present. So we find that our stats are maybe a little bit skewed from other years and what we would normally see. So, but what I was going to say is that because of the stats constantly going down, I could take credit and say it's as a result of all the good work that the men and women of my detachment are doing. And I believe that that is partially correct because they do a lot of things to focus on crime and community. But at the same time, there are external factors. So although I don't want to take all the credit for these good statistics, I also don't want to take all the blame when those stats inevitably do go up eventually. So, but I'll just refer to a couple. The biggest one under property crime, the biggest numbers, like as you can see under robbery, there is a huge increase, but at the same time, it goes from 1 to 3. So when it's a low number like that, any additional incident causes a drastic increase or decrease in the numbers. But probably the most common and the highest number is in the area of assault under person crime. And over the last 5 years, we've seen a 35% reduction. And total persons crimes, a 16% reduction over the last 5 years. And something that the general public is always interested in as well is property crime. That's the next section. And if you look at the 5-year trend, break and enters are down 53% within the town of Stony Plain. That's what these stats are for, is just the town itself. Theft of motor vehicle is down 31%. Theft over is up 9%, and theft under $5,000 is down 54%, for a total property crime rate change of down 42% in the last 5 years. Total criminal code over the last 5 years in the town of Stony Plain is down 32%. So, as you know, statistics can say a lot of things and can mean a lot of different things, and there's external factors that affect statistics that are beyond our control. But at the same time, probably a better picture of how we're doing within the town of Stony Plain itself is to compare ourselves with other communities across Alberta. And so, although you don't have them, I've also brought with me comparator stats that have the average of the exact same statistics for municipal detachments across Central Alberta District. And just as a comparator, I'll list off a few. Total persons crimes in Stony Plain over the last 5 years are down 16%, whereas the rest of Alberta is down just 2%. Assaults here are down 35%, whereas across Alberta down 7%. I could go through each property crime specifically. Our numbers are largely better, but the overall average of property crime in Stony Plain is down 42% over the last 5 years, whereas across Alberta it's just down 7%. So as a community, we are doing better than other communities in Central Alberta. And the total criminal code is down 32% in Stony Plain, whereas it's down 9% in the rest of the communities. So that's all I'll say about the statistics. On the last page that I sent to you has specific incidents and then whether it's within norm or an issue. And pending any questions from council, I do have explanations for each one. There's 3 that say issue, and I can explain those if you do have questions. I'm not sure if I mentioned at one of the previous meetings that we had set up a special position within the detachment, and it's shared between the town of Stony Plain and the city of Spruce Grove. And this member concentrates on the concerns of council and the public. He doesn't respond to calls for service, but he does respond to problem areas that we see, like I said, calls from council or the public, or areas that we've identified ourselves through our analyst or just anecdotally that we see a problem in a certain area. And that constable has worked a lot with the community peace officers and done a lot of different initiatives, whether it be speeding, distracted driving, liaising with the youth at different skate parks, and we have seen a lot of success in those areas. He's out on the trails, and he's quite engaged with the public. So we have seen a very positive outcome from the creation. It wasn't a creation of a position, it was basically taking one from the watch to put in those areas as a more proactive role. Since the last time I was here, just a few days after the last time I was here, we had a regimental ball, and it was an RCMP regimental ball, but it raised money for victim services. As you may be aware, it's a nonprofit organization, and it raised several $1,000s for victim services, which was great, and was very well supported by the community. Since our last meeting as well, we had Farmers' Days, and just in the time that I've been here, Farmers' Days used to be fairly busy for us, quite a wild weekend with the members heavily tasked. Not to say that they're not still busy, but we haven't seen the issues that we typically see with the problems with drinking and specifically with youth causing problems kind of in and around and after. So I think that the enhanced people that we put out there have definitely had a positive effect on Farmers' Days, and it does create a better environment for families in the community who are attending. And then this is a very brief presentation. The last thing that I wanted to bring up, and I believe I sent it to you in email, but I don't know if I've actually addressed council about it. As you mentioned when I came up, this will be probably my last presentation to council, although I don't have an exact move date yet. I have been promoted and transferred. I'll be going to the RCMP Training Academy in Regina and assuming what's called the training officer position there, overseeing the training for our National Academy for the RCMP. So basically second in charge of Depot. And I just wanted to say that I'd like to thank each of you for the support that you provided. I've worked with you, Mr. Mayor, and various councillors over the last several years that I've been here, and it's great when we have a community that is supportive, that we can work together to address community issues and problems, because no one entity can focus and work on these issues by themselves. It's much better when everybody comes together with solutions to the problems. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation and highlighting the last quarter stats. Members of council, any questions for clarity and understanding? Okay. On page 10, I think you mentioned that there was a few things that were like an issue that was flagged, and one of them is the well-being checks, and especially an increase for 2022. And the previous years, some of the commentary was that we were isolated. There was health restrictions in terms of travel. But this year, and after the first quarter, a lot of those restrictions were lifted. But yet I still see the well-being checks higher than the last 5 years and even last year as well.
I think that that is a trend that has continued. As I've said many times in the meetings, the world's not what it used to be, and I think that there is a reliance upon us, people with either limited mobility or just getting used to doing things a certain way, and having the police check on people has become more of an accepted means of, like one could argue that these well-being checks are more appropriately taken care of by someone else. We certainly are glad to do them, and certainly look out for the best interests of the community. And when it's something like we attend to them all the time, where a person's concerned about their neighbor, we'll certainly attend. Is there another means that's available? Possibly, but I think that a lot of people look to us in terms of why the number is still high. I think it's just become the accepted practice that you call on us to do that type of thing.
Thank you. Any more questions, comments? Councillor Hansford, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. Inspector Loken, I didn't get to know you as well as some of the other councillors because I wasn't on council the previous 4 years. However, I'm just curious, well, I don't know if it's really a question. Surely they must tell you out there in the world that if you take a position at Stony Plain, it's a big stepping stone to go up higher in the RCMP, because it seems like we get such wonderful people in your position, and then they go on to be a big wig in the RCMP. So it's nothing less than I would have expected to see happen and come your way after meeting you, but I wanted to simply express that you're respected and loved far more in the community sometimes than maybe you realize, and the RCMP members realize. I know there's a big controversy going on right now about a provincial police force versus RCMP. There will not be a supporter for me to go to a provincial police force, because I totally respect and value the RCMP because of people like you. So thank you so much for all that you've given to our region, for being good at continuing to blend these communities together out of what once was a very difficult process when it was laid in front of the Stony Plain, Spruce Grove communities that this would be a joint detachment, and I would judge all of this to be extremely successful. So thank you for the role that you've played, and I wish you very well in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hansford. Any other questions, comments from members of council? Maybe just a question regarding some of the stats again. Under the motor vehicle, I can see it's trending down 35% in terms of fatalities, injuries, etc. But looking at the breakdown where you've page 10 again, showing that there has been an increase in speeding violations, and that continues to be asterisked as an issue in their community. So in terms of speeding in our community, is that a rising issue that we need to address and put more focus on as community leaders?
I think statistics can say a number of things, and it's all in how you interpret them. And how I would interpret that statistic specifically about speeding going up is because of the concerns that have been brought forward by council, because of our continued messaging to the public that if you have areas of concern, to call them in. We are addressing the issue more often, and so those stats would include self-generated on our behalf or calls from the public calling in to report that. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bigger problem. It's, I think, more that we are focusing on the issue and finding more of these offenses when we're looking for them. But they could also mean the opposite, right? But that's my interpretation of that.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Anything else before I let you go? Councillor Williams, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. Inspector Larkin, not 100% sure where to find it in your stats, but we hear complaints from the residents in regards to the skate park and bullying and fighting and drugs and issues there. Would you say, from your experience, that we are seeing downward trends in that area because of your presence here, or is it something that we're still addressing? We did hear prior to taking our break that the skate park was slowly declining in those issues, but again, we see or hear from the residents that it's still a major concern.
There are, I am aware of some incidents that have come up that have been very prolific on social media. And so when you do have those, and I'm not trying to minimize the incidents themselves, but I'm saying that when you do have a significant incident that does happen and it's spread on social media, then everybody's aware of it, and it is a bigger issue than what it normally could be or would be. I can say that we have heard council's concerns, we've heard the public's concerns about the skate park being somewhat of an issue sometimes. We have concentrated patrols in that area. Our new constable in that position that I spoke about earlier does concentrate on the skate park as one of his stops, and he does work with the CPOs to address the potential issues in that area. And I know that he and the CPOs have jointly had some successes in seizing drugs at the skate park and holding those people accountable. So if you make it kind of a hot spot for where we go, I would suggest that it's probably going to see not as much activity or not as much negative activity in the area. So that's our hope by focusing on what's happening there.
Awesome, thank you so much.
Okay, I see no more hands up. On behalf of council and our community, thank you very much for the work that you've done in the community. Definitely the stats have shown that there has been a decrease in the majority of the issues that we have in our community. And definitely that's, like you mentioned, a partnership between the Town of Stony Plain, the RCMP, and our residents as well. I think it takes all members of the community to get those numbers down, and that has happened under your leadership, so we definitely appreciate it. There is one thing that I would ask you to do for us when you move on to your next role. As you know, one of the issues that the Town of Stony Plain has is getting enough recruits to come to the Town of Stony Plain. When we apply for 1 or 2 extra RCMP officers, it may be a couple years before we actually get them into our detachment. And one of the reasons is that there's not enough people going through depot. So when you're second in charge there, can you bump that up and get more people through depot?
Well, I will try, and that is going to be one of my parts is working with recruiting to attract the type of people that we need to this position. I can say that unfortunately police, and I've spoken to fire chiefs as well, and they're seeing in emergency services shift work, and I would think with the negativity that we've experienced over the last couple of years, particularly in the media, it's not an attractive job anymore that as many young people want to go to, but absolutely it is needed. So we need to find a way of attracting really good people to those positions to want to serve their communities. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you very much. General Manager or the Town Manager, any comments?
Your Worship, thank you for the opportunity, and certainly it's been a strong working relationship over the years. The other thing I would just quickly add, I've been to Depot a number of times. It is an absolutely fascinating place to visit, sunset ceremonies and all that sort of thing. So now that we know we got a friend there, we got a place to stay. I think the officers mess, I'm sure they just let anybody kind of stay overnight there or what have you. But certainly, thank you for your commitment to our community.
Thank you.
Your Worship, members of council, certainly from administrative perspective, Mike is, or Inspector Locken has been very good and instrumental, and I would also suggest that from a mentorship with our municipal employees, so we do have the administrative staff over there, his care and control and passionate ability to mitigate some of the challenges and issues that we have over there from time to time. He certainly plays a huge role in making sure that that group is ticking and happy. Our CPOs definitely look up to Mike and his leadership that he's created over at the RCMP detachment. And the position that Mike formally or mentioned this evening in terms of the constable and the community, we have great success with that particular position, and our CPOs are working with that position weekly on initiatives. So it's been a tremendous asset, and Mike and his leadership group brought that to our community, and it serves both ourselves and the city of Spruce Grove well. And the constable is the type of individual that I think suits the principles and the values of our community well. And it's started to show in some of the initiatives and started the downward trend in some of our criminal stats. So I think a lot of that is a testament to Mike's leadership at the detachment and the time that he's been here. And he's seen it through a staff sergeant and into an inspector role, and I think he's brought that community level service through both of those ranks, and I think that's something that's very important to our council.
Thank you very much. And then, so again, thank you for your work. Council will definitely accept any weekend boot camp that you want to put us through. We're more than happy to go test our mettle with RCMP and see what a day in the life of an RCMP cadet would be like. But before we go, we'd like to send you off with a little gift. The members of council can come join us down, take a picture, and thank you, Inspector Locken.
I don't want to look at it upside down for the first time.
Maybe not even know. It's a perfect reflection.
It is. That's beautiful. Thank you.
I apologize.
No.
They were elected for the brains. So it's all pretty faces here.
It looks good. It looks good either way. Thank
It
you.
is actually very beautiful. This is for your time in town, Stony playing, just the work that you've done to help us with community policing.
Thank you.
That was one of the big initiatives to make sure that the RCMP is more responsive for what community policing is and not what the National Federation of Policing wants.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Let's go get a picture.
Sure.
All right, take care.
He's also committed to getting Israel on block tattoo. So that's long arm of the law. Ready? Yep.
Thank you. Lots of memories.
Absolutely. Every time I look at this, and with good memories. I mean, spoken before that, in the RCP world, this is a busy detachment. I don't want to say that there was a stigma about this detachment, but with the new building and the staffing levels that we have now and just the morale and everything that we have going for us, it is a sought after detachment because it used to be that staffing would have to really work to find people, and now they have a list of people who want to come here. So I think that's a testament to, and like I said, when you have a community and a council as supporters of this, it certainly makes it attractive to people coming here as well. So thank you very much. Thank you. It's huge.
All right, thank you, Council. We wish Inspector Loken well in his new position. Moving on agenda number 5, which is the statutory public hearing. So again, just to outline the public hearing, it is a public hearing that allows us to deal with the proposed road closure in Brickyard Stage 5. Again, this is a hearing, so a record is kept of it. This is an opportunity to allow residents and people that may be affected to have the opportunity to have direct input within the town of Stony Plain. The way that the hearing goes is I will call the hearing to order. We'll hear a presentation from administration. Council gets the opportunity to ask questions for understanding and clarification. Then the applicant gets to make a presentation, and then again, council gets to ask questions for clarity and understanding. Then all those that are in favor of the proposal get to speak next. Then those that are not in favor of the proposal, and those that have a general comment of the proposal. And at each stage, council has the opportunity to ask questions for clarity and understanding. Okay. This is a formal hearing, so after this, council does not take any more information on the subject, and we'll be dealing with it a little bit later in the business items. Okay, with that, I'll call the public hearing for proposed road closure by law 2663 RC/22 to order. And go ahead, administration.
Thank you, Your Worship. Administration has prepared a short presentation on the subject for the road closure. As council may recall, the first reading of this road closure occurred on June 27th, and it is a follow-up ahead of seeking ministerial approval for the formal closure ahead of the second and third reading. I'll now pass it to our manager of planning to provide the presentation.
Good evening, council. So this is the public hearing for Bylaw 2663 RC22 for the Brickyard Stage 5 road closure bylaw. In terms of the land use planning framework in Stony Plain, this falls under the land development. So previously we came to council with both an area structure plan and an LUB amendments for Stage 5. In terms of the chronology I have here on this slide, you can see we were here in June. June through August here, we've been working on the road closure itself, coming back to council on the 27th of June. And concurrently with that, we've gone through and have a tentative approval for the subdivision, which the developer is just working on right now. They have a grading and stripping permit, so they're currently on site right now and finalizing their engineering drawings and going to enter into a development agreement right after. In terms of what we're talking about here, so as part of the land use bylaw districting, you can see there's a little tiny area circled in sort of a red-orange there on the screen. Originally, this area was proposed to have 3 different local roads off the collector or Brickyard Drive. The one that's circled there is no longer required because they're only proposing 2 local roads off of the collector. So again, the area of the closure is literally just the small little flare that exists there. For context on this, just good planning principles, we always try to pre-plan where these locals are going to be. I would say 95% of the time or more, they are approved and developed accordingly. This happens to be one of those times that's not planned. So in terms of our next steps, we've advertised for this public hearing. We're hosting it right now. After this, ministerial approval will be required. As part of the approval of a road closure bylaw, a public hearing has to take place in order for the Minister of Transportation to look at it. And that approval is required before second and third reading is given by council in order to allow the bylaw to be activated and approved. Therefore, once or if the public hearing gets concluded, administration would work with staff and with Alberta Transportation to ensure we apply properly with the province to get their approval. Upon receiving that acceptance, or if we get that acceptance from the minister, we would then come back to council for a second and third reading, and council can then decide upon the bylaw. To date, no comments have been received by the public. Again, as indicated, after we have this, we would proceed to apply for the approval of Alberta Transportation, the ministry. With that, any questions? Thank you.
Thank you, administration. To members of council, any questions for clarity and understanding? Councillor Hansard.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm going to refer to page 223 of 165 with the big purple circle around the, indicating the notification area for this. Two factors, I think, contribute to not very many people being notified, although I certainly didn't hear any complaints about that. One is that I think administration is using a standard diameter circle to grab the notification area like you would in any other more developed or fully developed area of town. In this case, though, I believe there are approximately 31 homes at the very north of this circle and 9 at the very bottom of the circle. And I'm just wondering, when you realize you're over vacant land with no through road yet, what was the process that stopped administration from just grabbing all of Brickyard? Because it wouldn't have been that many more people by moving the circle up and encompassing all the established area of Brickyard and then dropping down and grabbing those extra 9 residents. You'd absolutely have put notification in front of everybody in the Brickyard subdivision because most of it isn't even built. I did talk to 2 people who live in that subdivision, and neither had any concern whatsoever. 1, they thought it was a good move, and 2, how would we know? There's no road, we're not driving through there. And yes, I got my notification letter, and I don't have any issue. Maybe something will come up as traffic is opened, but right now there's nothing to complain about. So this goes along with my adage, if you can do things where there's nobody around to complain or raise concerns, it's way easier. But I'm just wondering if admin could speak to why maybe this notification didn't include all of Brickyard.
So, Councillor Hansard, addressing your question about notifications, so that blue circle, inner circle, is what is required by the MGA. Mm-hmm. So that's the minimum requirements.
Okay.
The purple is what council has increased the radius so that we can notify more people.
I get that, but where you've got a subdivision, Mr. Mayor, where there's no people there, but there's about 60 or 70 north.
100%. And then the fact of the reason that we did and continue with the same advertising and same notification is because we have a process. We don't want to change the process for each and every subdivision based on where they are, who's developed, who's not developed. Because in some highly contested issues, we could drop that circle down to the minimum so have less people to interact with that road closure or property change. Mm-hmm. So that's not the idea of what council wants to do. The council wants to be stable and have consistent rules for everyone, regardless if you're in a dense population area or a non-dense population area.
I understand.
Which is similar to what our North Business Park is, where there's lots of land but very little buildings. But we still give it the same radius because we want to make sure it's fair for everyone.
I understand. So, Mr. Mayor, thank you for that. However, I'm just curious because now I don't think anybody in admin will say anything that will contradict with what you just said. Because I'm just curious what admin's response might have been to that question that was put forward to admin.
Go ahead.
Through your worship to Councillor Hansard, thank you for the question. Public notification is something of is something we try and keep consistent within the town when we're doing these bylaws and public hearings. We certainly want to enable as much of the public to be notified about changes in their neighborhood, in their communities, as much as possible. The mayor's comments on the circles are correct. In this, we do aim to exceed what is required of us as we go. Your comment is well accepted that in this instance, I mean, the circle being drawn on vacant lands does not necessarily reflect the catchment of the area purported. The nuance in this particular area is that it isn't a road that's constructed that we're closing. It is a road on an area structure plan that we are trying to align with previous discussions from council. So in this particular instance, we felt that the radius outlined was sufficient for this particular public hearing. As the mayor noted, there can be contentious ones that we want to make sure that we are being affirmative with the community as much as possible. I don't know if this answers your question, but
I appreciate that. Mr. Mayor, thank you for your answer. And I do hear now that it's more about consistency and that the notification area for the record is actually far greater than what would have been required. And we expanded that, so I appreciate it.
Thank you, Councilor Hansard. Any other questions for clarity and understanding? Okay. See none, we'll move on to the next procedure in public hearing. Is the applicant here to speak?
Given the administrative nature of this, the applicant has not come to speak in this case. Given the majority of the public engagement takes place at the area structure plan and land use bylaw process, the consideration from the applicant was that this, again, is an administrative process that we're just continuing. And given that there were no comments that was passed on to the applicant, they chose not to come to this. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Moving on to our next phase of the public hearing. Is all those in favor of the proposed bylaw change? Is your opportunity to speak? Administration, has anybody registered to speak?
Your Worship, no one has registered.
Okay. Does anybody in chambers like to speak in favor of the proposed bylaw change? Okay. See none, move on to the next phase of the procedure, and then all those that are not in favor of the proposed bylaw change. Administration, has anybody registered?
Your Worship, no one has registered.
Okay. Does anybody in chambers like to speak opposed to the proposed bylaw change? See none, move on to the next phase, which is general comments. Anybody wants to make a general comment about the proposed bylaw change? This is the opportunity. Administration, anybody registered?
Your Worship, no one has registered.
Okay. Anybody in the audience like to make a general comment about the proposed bylaw change? See none. That ends that. Just a reminder that this is a presentation, as mentioned by administration. Because it's a road closure, it has to go to the Minister of Transportation first, I believe, before it comes back for second and third reading. Since this is a public hearing, council is not able to entertain any more thoughts, conversations, or emails regarding this subject. Administration, anything to add to that?
No, Your Worship.
Okay. Okay, before we close the public hearing, administration has the rules been followed to meet the MGA requirements?
Yes, Your Worship.
Thank you. So with that, I'll call public hearing for the proposed bylaw closure of Brickyard Stage 5, bylaw 2663 RC/22 closed. Moving on agenda, number 6 is the RCM of July 11th. Councillor Anderson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move that Town Council approve the July 11th, 2022 regular council meetings as presented here.
Thank you. Council, you had a chance to read them. Any errors or omissions on the minutes? Okay. I didn't see any either, so I'll call the question. All those in favor? And that is carried. With number 7, which is council boards and commission minutes, there are none to report, so we'll move on to number 8, which is bylaws. 8.1. which is the property assessment subclass bylaw. Go ahead, administration.
Good evening, Your Worship and Council. Tonight I will be presenting the updated assessment subclass bylaw for Council's approval. Section 297 of the Municipal Government Act, or MGA, defines the main assessment classes and allows Council to define subclasses under certain classes as desired. Subsequently, the MGA allows Council to set different tax rates for each of these classes and subclasses. The town of Stony Plain currently has defined subclasses under residential and non-residential classes. Only classes of taxation that have subclasses need to be defined in this subclasses bylaw. Proposed changes to Bylaw 821 passed in 1982 are before Council today. In the residential subclass, administration is requesting a new subclass in response to approval of Council Policy CFS 047, Taxation of Vacant Lands. The policy was approved in September 2020 for the purposes of implementing an incremental tax rate to properties of which have been vacant for 7 years. At the time, the policy was to come into effect for the 2022 assessment year and implemented in the 2023 taxation year. In order to implement this policy, an additional subclass must be added to the bylaw for this class. The current bylaw separates an additional subclass for residential apartments, and the revised bylaw recommends updating this name to other residential. Under the MGA, municipalities are authorized to only create 3 subclasses as outlined for Class 2 non-residential. At this time, the proposed revisions request 1 additional subclass for vacant non-residential property to implement the taxation of vacant lands policy. Given the date of the previous bylaw, the updated bylaw reflects definitions and references non-existent in 1982 at the time the previous bylaw was created. Revisions presented include an update to the subclass under Class 1 residential properties with wording changed from residential apartments to other residential. The definition remains the same for this subclass. A 3rd subclass is requested to be created in Class 1 named Vacant Residential, and a 2nd subclass requested in Class 2, which is non-residential, for Vacant Non-Residential. For demonstration purposes, the chart on the screen defines the vacant land assessment as defined by the policy. Additional tax revenue generated by this implementation is estimated at approximately $122,000 or 0.65% tax. Property owners will be notified of the property subclass through their assessment notices in February 2023. The tax rate applicable will be approved by council or put forth in front of council in May 2023 based on the corporate planning recommendations. Administration is asking council to consider the motions outlined in the council package to approve the revision of the property assessment subclass bylaw 264 AS22.
Thank you for the presentation, members of council. Again, as administration has noted, this is a bylaw that's coming forward from a motion of council back in 2020 to create the vacant lands taxation. So we're going to tax vacant lands slightly more than ones that are currently being used for what they've been designed for. Members of council, questions and comments? Councilor Hansard.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm really glad to see this. I have worked in my real estate business with other municipalities that have tried to bring development to areas that have languished for long periods of time or kept people from land banking properties that could be developed and should be developed, which actually works quite often to stymie growth in a community, and it does cause hardship, let's say in an industrial area, all the other taxpayers in the industrial area bear a pretty heavy price, and they get things like snow removal and everything. Well, the vacant property also gets snow removal of the street and other services, but they're paying very low taxes because development or building permits have not been issued to anything on the property. So I'm very pleased that council tackled this previously and to see this come forward today. My question is, 7 years seems so long, and yet 2 years is probably not enough. Is there any way, Mr. Mayor, that the suggestion for 7 years for a vacant property to sit could be altered to a lesser time, perhaps 5 years or 4 years or 3 years, so that people are encouraged to do something with the land rather than sit on it?
Councilor Hansard, I said the answer would be yes, but not today.
Not
Today
today.
is a bylaw to create the subclass so that we can make them taxed differently. The review year for the vacant lands policy is when?
Thank you, Your Worship. The review date is 2027.
Okay, so Councilor Hansard, so in 2027, when council passed the bylaw in 2020, the review date is in 2027, so we can see how it's working, how it's affecting the community, then we can review it as administration and council at that time to decide if it's going to be 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, maybe 10 years.
Okay,
But
so
that's the time frame.
clarification, Mr. Mayor. So are you saying that nothing was done previously just to set up a period of time during which observation would happen? Or was there a step that was taken and now you're going to try to determine in 2027 if it was enough?
No. So Councilor Hansard, it comes into effect on January 1st of 2023.
Okay.
It was approved in September of 2020. At that time, council actually deferred an extra year so that we had the opportunity to go out and educate our landholders and landowners of what's happening and what the reasoning behind that is. And that is why it starts January 1st of 2023, and that will give us a couple years to evaluate before we review the vacant lands policy back on council in 2027.
Okay, supplemental, Mr. Mayor. Then nothing really, as far as the public is concerned, has been done yet. That will happen in early 2023 to notify people, or is there something being done right now?
There should have been something done now, because when council passed it in 2020, the reason why it was not enacted in 2021 or 2022, and we're waiting until 2023, is because we wanted administration to have that messaging out to our land.
Is it going out, Your Worship?
That was one of my questions. I wanted some feedback of
Okay.
what was done and communicated to our landowners, because that was the direction from council when we approved it.
Thank you for that. I'll let you carry on from there.
Thank you. Administration, since Councilor Hansard made the comment and asked the question about education, because that was one of the reasons why council deferred enacting the bylaw till January 1st of 2023, was that we had that opportunity to educate our landowners. Can administration provide some information of what was done the last year and a half?
Thank you, Your Worship. The policy approval in 2020 was communicated broadly to the public and the landowners at that time when the approval was undertaken. The policy continues to be publicly available on our website and communicated wherever applicable to a property owner. And as the Manager of Finance had indicated, notices will be issued in February with regards to the next step in the process of implementing the policy with the bylaw changes for those classes.
Has UDI been part of the conversation as the Development Institute of the area?
Your Worship, I can't speak to specific conversations with UDI with regards to this. No, it was the communication with regards to the policy was approved broadly to the community as well as to the property owners directly, but I'm not aware of any specific communications to UDI with regards to this policy. I'm just looking at our General Manager of Planning and Infrastructure if he's aware of anything that could augment that.
Your Worship, to the best of my knowledge, we haven't reached out directly to UDI on this subject, but that would not preclude us from doing so at a later time.
Councilor Hansard, yes, so some residents have been notified of what the changes are. The direct conversation has not yet quite happened to the extent that I'd like to see, but hopefully that does happen before the mail out goes out for the 2023 taxation year. Okay. Any other questions for clarity and understanding? And you're absolutely right, Councilor Hansard, your comments about land banking and still having everybody pay their share of the services that are delivered within town Stony Plain. Okay, seeing no more hands up for clarity, I'll ask the Councilor Hansard.
You're wanting me to make the motion now, Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Councilor Hansard.
All right, thank you. Mr. Mayor, I move that Town Council give first reading to Bylaw 2664 AS 22, a bylaw authorizing the creation of residential and non-residential property subclasses.
Okay, thank you. Members of council, there's a motion on the floor. I'll entertain questions for debate and comment before we move on. Any questions for debate? Questions for clarity? Okay. See none. I thank administration for bringing this forward and taking the time that council requested. Because I know when we were first dealing with it, the enactment date was a lot sooner than 2023. I'm glad that we as a council took the vantage point of taking it slow and just making sure we get the message out for residents first before we enact it, and which is now why it's almost 2 years later before it gets enacted. Call the question for the first reading. All in favor? Okay, that's carried. Councillor Meyer.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. The Town Council gives second reading to Bylaw 2664/AS/22.
Okay. Any questions, comments, and debate? Call the question. All in favor of second reading? That's carried. Okay, move on next. For those that are watching and those that are in the gallery, if council deals with a bylaw in all three readings in one sitting, there has to be unanimous consent, so that is the next motion. Councilor Plechko.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. The Town Council give unanimous consent to consider third reading of Bylaw 2664/AS/22.
Thank you. Call the question. All in favor? That's carried. Councillor Loynes.
Town Council give third reading to the bylaw 2664/AS/22.
Okay. Any comments, questions before we call? No. Again, I think just echo the comments of Councillor Hansard. In our community, we've seen a lot of vacant lands, people land banking lands that have a detriment effect within the town of Stony Plain. The vacant land policy that was passed in 2020 hopes to address that, but we didn't enact it in 2021 because we want to make sure that we gave our residents ample time to adjust and look at what they're doing before this becomes into a full bylaw. And January 1st is when it becomes the first bylaw of its kind in Stony Plain. Call the question. All in favor of third reading? That's carried. Moving on to 8.2, the cannabis consumption bylaw. Go ahead, administration.
Your Worship, members of council, this bylaw is before you this evening as part of our typical cycle of bylaw review. So this bylaw has been in place in the town of Stony Plain for 4 years, and it was a result of cannabis being legalized in Canada. The provincial government does have legislation around cannabis and the consumption of cannabis in public spaces. They also did provide the opportunity for municipalities to provide additional enforcement or additional restrictions around cannabis in their own communities. Town of Stony Plain did 4 years ago take advantage of that opportunity, and we did basically take a more of a zero consumption approach in our public spaces. So we strengthened the provincial legislation around cannabis in the community. As council can see in the report, there's a slight change to section 2.1 in terms of language, and we did also through our research, look at the fine review, and some communities have increased, and legislation provincially, they've increased their fines slightly, so we increased ours in accordance with that to align. So very little change to this bylaw. We still believe that this bylaw is a prudent bylaw to have in our community, and we've seen some success with it. As you can see in the quarterly report coming later in the agenda, we have had some files. It also, helps with our RCMP joint operations when we were able to go, because we do have a strengthened bylaw. Happy to take questions, Council.
Okay. Thank you. Members of council, any questions for clarity and understanding? Go ahead, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you for the presentation. I did take a look as I was reviewing the package in the files that have been generated and kind of tried to keep an eye on the numbers. I do have a question in regards to 3.1 in the bylaw. A person must not smoke or attempt to smoke, vape, or consume cannabis in any public place within the town limits. I'm just curious because we obviously know that people live in various dwellings, and some of those dwellings themselves do not allow, whether it be cannabis consumption, tobacco, anything like that, they don't allow smoking of any type in there or on that private property. So with every other controlled substance, there is a suitable and applicable place in where somebody can consume that. With cannabis, there isn't. And so I'm just curious if there has been any consideration or any thought around, where somebody could legally and appropriately consume cannabis within the community if they're unable to do so in their place of residence.
Your Worship, through the Deputy Mayor, Laurie, no, we have not looked at that option. Certainly something that if council deems fit, we could go back and look at, but we don't. Typically, if someone owns a dwelling and they restrict smoking or cannabis or any type of activity, that's left to the condo owner, the homeowner, as to what conduct is permitted or not permitted in their property. And I believe there's rental acts that they would have to follow if the renter was not following that. So not likely that we would get involved in that type of conversation with them. Typically in circumstances like that, it's if someone's not adhering to the rental agreement, there's other things that are going on also that we typically get involved with in terms of unsightly. So by purview of alignment, we might have some in, but strictly speaking, for a site in Stony Plain where people can go and smoke cannabis legally, within this bylaw, we have not looked at, and I would have to check with our enforcement staff, but I don't believe there's anything that's come up that other communities are looking at doing so.
Certainly, no, and thank you, Your Worship. And just to follow on to that, I do liken it to, and I completely, again, respect the Landlord-Tenant Act and rental agreements and those type of things. I think, similar to smoking, a lot of these things exist in multi-unit dwellings because of a safety factor. Not consuming a flammable material or using a flammable source to consume that material. And, we hear a lot about now, for instance, the city of Edmonton, and they're talking about the allowance of alcohol consumption in parks that they have allowed to do. And essentially anybody who finds themselves in that situation, who may be a consumer of cannabis, is in a position where they have no legal ability to consume cannabis, which is now legal, in Stony Plain. And so I'm not necessarily looking for any change at this point in time, but I do think it is something that at some point in time we may need to find a way to address, because at this point in time, if anybody were to consume cannabis anywhere in the town of Stony Plain aside from private property, it could end up as a file with either our police force or with our own internal bylaw. And is that really an effective use of their time? Is that really worth the resource off simply somebody who is partaking in cannabis? So, it's something that's raised as a flag for me, as I think we need to keep an eye on. I think we need to look at what options may exist out there, how it can be addressed. I totally agree with everything that's in the provincial regulation about where it cannot be consumed and that where it should be kept away. But one of the things we see is even the provincial act is starting to adapt. And the biggest example of that is where all cannabis stores required full covering on their windows. So there was no visibility into, similar to what they've done with cigarettes at the gas station and covering all that. Well, they've now rescinded that because they've realized that it actually caused more problems on theft, vandalism, etc. inside of the locations. And so now the Provincial Cannabis Act has been amended because it's found that problem. And I'd be curious to see in our files that have been generated by bylaw enforcement and by the RCMP, how many of them are simple consumption. And if we had a place where that could be consumed legally or a way that could be consumed legally, would that free up those resources from having to deal with a file that is a very, in my mind, minor issue? So just some thoughts on that.
Thanks for your comments. Deputy Mayor, any other questions, comments? Councillor Hansard?
Worship, thank you. I appreciate Deputy Mayor Laurie's comments. I'm going to ask a different kind of a question. When we have a restriction around consumption of cannabis, I believe we're speaking about smoking. But cannabis comes in multiple ways. What is to prevent someone from consuming chewables or anything else in their place of residence? It doesn't disturb a neighbor. There is no foul odor from it. And it's illegal. It's been made legal federally and provincially. So do we need to possibly consider different wording in that the consumption would be by way of smoking or growing, because either of those disturb other people, but a gummy with cannabis in it does not?
Your Worship, through to Councillor Hansard, sorry. Our bylaw does speak to consuming in public places. It is a tricky and a difficult one for us to enforce, simply because we don't test. RCMP, certainly, if they pull someone over roadside, they have the ability to test to see if someone's impaired. I think based on someone's actions, you can ask some investigative questions about what they might be consuming, and you might get to the crux of what's happening. Currently, my neighbor could smoke cannabis in their backyard freely, and we would have no enforcement authority with that, even though it could be disturbing me or not disturbing me, because it's on their private property. If you go to Rotary Park and consume, then our enforcement actions would start to enact. So with this, the consumption is listed here, and I think it's listed here for the ability for us to enforce, should we have the ability to enforce consumption. You're right, gummies, chocolate bars, there's a whole plethora of items that you can have from an edible perspective. But it is a challenging one for us in terms of that particular use of cannabis. Very difficult. A bag of Smarties could be full of edibles, and we're not aware of it just because it looks like a commercial bag of Smarties. So there's some things our CPOs can do to enforce that, but it's more likely the smoke, the secondhand smoke, and the vaping, which produces the smell, and the impact to others around them that is more of a concern from that perspective.
Your Worship, just for clarification, so if the general manager is speaking to any consumption, I hear you, I can take that into my mind, but I struggle with that, particularly when it's almost like, I don't know, I'm not a police officer, I'm not in the health industry, but it's hard if somebody is just intaking a small amount of cannabis through a gummy to even detect it. So are you saying that the only way that we would have any problem come up is if it is detectable? Is that the issue?
Your Worship, to Councillor Hansard, I'll maybe relate it to this example. Drinking liquor in a public place is also a criminal offense. But likely a lot of people have cups or slushy cups or other cups that can camouflage liquor. And until someone's behavior warrants someone inspecting that cup, often that type of activity may be happening in our community also, but there's not a visible opportunity for us to know that cup might be full of something that might be not permitted. So if someone was causing a disturbance and consuming edibles, then that might lead us to other enforcement agencies that have the ability to test and confirm that there is an issue related to cannabis versus our CPO officers being able to do that very quickly.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So again, the current bylaw does state that smoking, attempt to smoke, vape, or to consume cannabis in a public place is not allowed. But in all private properties that they have the ability to, that is allowed. Any other questions? Okay, just a question. I do see the increase in the fines from 287 to 300, and I think the general manager said that's kind of in line with some of the other fines that are around the community. I do have a question regarding 2.1, where it's read out, where it crossed out says what appears to be cannabis. So I think that was in the original bylaw where it says it appears to be cannabis because we can't verify it. So was there a reason why that was taken out?
Your worship, through to yourself and the rest of the council, I believe this just definitively states cannabis. Likely our CPO officers would have to have that smell of cannabis and clearly identify it as cannabis versus making an assumption it might be cannabis and then acting upon it from that perspective. Again, I think the RCMP have the ability to test. We would have to take it to their lab if we, and often we do that. If we do take it away from an individual, it does go to their holding facility at the detachment, and it goes through the rigors that they would require us to do, and we do have to fill out paperwork and hand it over to the RCMP. So I think this is just more clear in terms of it defines exactly what we'd be looking for, and it takes the objectivity away from our bylaw and it permits clarity for our CPO officers.
Yeah, Your Worship, I'll maybe just jump in really quickly on that too. So again, a pure legal reading of that particular line will indicate that we could find somebody for consuming what appears to be cannabis, but is not. That's the way it reads. So, I think it's more just a clear up or a clean up of the wording.
Thank you. Any other questions from administration or council? Maybe just one question for administration again. When council approved the bylaw in 2018, we put a 4-year time review to see if anything needs to be changed. And obviously, there's some minor changes here. Does administration still think that a 4-year review cycle is good, or can we make that 5-year review cycle, a 6-year review cycle? In terms of what we've seen over the last 4 years, is a 4-year review cycle adequate, or can we extend that, or can we shorten that time?
Your Worship, I think administratively we've started to use a 4-year cycle on most of our bylaws, so I think keeping it consistent with the rest of our reviews makes a lot of sense because our staff are used to that 4-year cycle review. So some things of this could change legislatively, of course. If something does change that we need to change our bylaw, it could be back sooner. But certainly the 4 years allows us that flexibility to alter change and come back to you in a timely fashion with a review of the bylaw. I'm not sure that 5 or 6 years would gain us any more or any less than the 4-year period.
Okay. And then my question to administration again, then, in terms of reviewing bylaws, in the bylaw, if council approves it, it shall be reviewed in the 4th year, so being 2026 or earlier, if the provincial government or the federal government changes their cannabis bylaws. But what if in 4 years, in 2026, our town administration reviews it and there's no changes needed? So does that have to come back to council? Because it's not really a governance issue, or because we've already approved it, and if it does not affect the community, we don't need to change it, then is it reviewed back by council, or is it just reviewed by administration? If there's changes that need to happen, then it comes back to council?
Your Worship, thanks for that question. I don't know that I would say there's an absolute answer to that, other than, if we look at a bylaw, nothing's changed, the world hasn't changed, so on and so forth, we wouldn't bring it into the chambers just to say that. You'd either be potentially notified in some other manner, or it would just await a further change, like another cycle or something else happens or what have you.
Okay, yeah, I appreciate that. And in terms of what we do on council is provide governance and leadership and to review the policies again because nothing's changed, then that's kind of like continue to as is unless something needs to change.
Yeah, Your Worship, and I know, the legislative services aspect of the organization, has work plans about reviewing the policy, timing, and so on. So just for council's awareness too, on whether it's a policy and or a bylaw review, that'll often go through a couple different business units, if that makes sense. A couple different sets of eyes. It's not necessarily just the one particular area that I'll take a peek at it or see if anything's changed. But other than some minor wording, most of them likely will see something different that'll have to come in a 4 to 5 year cycle.
Okay, thank you. With that, Deputy Mayor, can I make you make a motion for the first reading, please?
Thank you. I'll move the town council give first reading to bylaw 2665/G/22, a bylaw restricting the consumption of cannabis within the corporate boundaries of the town of Stony Plain.
Okay. Members of council, again, open the floor for questions and debate. So it's just a minor wording change and just increasing the fines from $287 to $300. Any questions, comments, debate? Seeing none, call the question. All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Councillor Loynes, second reading, please.
Town council gives second reading to bylaw 2665/G/22.
Okay. Call the question. All in favor? Okay. And again, for those that are watching and here in the gallery, that if council deals with the bylaw, all three readings in one evening, there has to be unanimous consent. Councillor Meyer, please.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. The Town Council give unanimous consent to consider third reading of bylaw 2665/G/22.
Thank you. Call the question. All in favor? That's carried. Councillor Pechko, third reading, please.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. The Town Council give third reading to bylaw 2665/G/22.
Okay. Any comments, questions, debate? No. Again, on behalf of council and community, thank you very much, administration, for bringing this back forward with those minor changes and reviewing that for us, because I know back in 2018, it was a hotly contested issue as cannabis was being legalized in the country, and we want to make sure that we looked at it through a lens of Stony Plain residents, and we made the best possible decisions based on who we talked to, health regulations from the provincial government and federal government before we came and passed our bylaw. I'm glad to see that it has held the test of time of 4 years with some minor changes, and we look forward to the review in the next 4 years. Call the question. All those in favor? Okay, it's carried. Moving on to number 9, business items. Looking at RCMP quarterly update, we just had the presentation. Councillor Hansard for the motion, please.
Your Worship, I move that Town Council accept the RCMP update for information.
Thank you. Members of council, any questions, debate, comments to administrative staff? Councillor Hansard.
Thank you, Your Worship. One of the best things that we see in our council packages, in my opinion, is the quarterly updates. They're very interesting reading. It gives me, and I'm sure other readers of those quarterly reports, a sense of the town's business in a very clear way. It lets us see that we're moving forward in important areas and that we're looking after the business of the people of Stony Plain. So there were a number of pieces that stood out for me in this quarterly report. One, I wanted to mention on page 124.
Councillor Hansard, I'm going to ask you to hold that question until we get to 9.3.
Oh, okay.
This is 9.1. We're still just doing the accepting the information that was presented by Inspector Loken.
Sorry, I got ahead of myself.
Yes, you did. I think you're gung-ho and eager to speak.
I am
to it.
gung-ho. I thought that was going to be my motion.
We couldn't skip 9.1 or 9.2 to go 9.3.
Okay, I'll hold it.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments regarding the RCMP quarterly update? Councillor Meyer?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Just broadly to administration, or well, actually to anyone on council. So just to, if I were interested in trying to get a handle on whether an opioid crisis was occurring in this community, which I think we all kind of have some idea that that does occur in our community, but to what extent I couldn't tell you. Our statistics from the RCMP do mention drugs, and there's a section on those. Generally, though, they're not very specific. I'm just curious if administration where I would go about finding out that type of information.
Go ahead, Administration.
Your Worship, through to Councillor Meyer, it's a good question. We can look into that answer for you further. I would assume Health would have some stats on it, and we probably have to look at a few agencies to get some fair assessment and numbers for you. Usually the RCMP are the first line that would raise the flag, and they're not. But certainly the fire department does have some responses, medical responses to these types of things too. So I think a combination of RCMP and response would be appropriate, but we can look into that question and get back to you via email.
Okay, just to follow up, so what I'm hearing is you're going to gather some information for me and get back to me. Okay, perfect, thank you.
Okay. And that's good too, and that might be a conversation or a question that we ask Alberta Health Services when we have our next meeting with them. Well, the last 2 years with COVID, those meetings have been canceled, but when the next one comes up, that's something to ask because, as mentioned, that the RCMP and usually Alberta Health Services are the frontline staff that deal with all those calls first. Okay, any more questions regarding the quarterly update? Okay, seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Okay, and that's carried. Move on to 9.2, the pool covering. Go ahead, Administration.
Your Worship, members of Council, just for ease of our presentation tonight, this information is all included in your package, but just summarized on a quick slide so that perhaps we can just look at the screen. So Council did ask us, in addition to the detailed design that's happening with the rec facility, to consider some options related to covering the existing outdoor pool and turning it into more of a 12-month operation. Also with an opportunity for us to have it open in the wintertime and then revert back to the summer operations and provide as much opportunity for outdoor experience as possible. Two of the structures that we did look at to assist us with this is an air-supported structure, which, as most of you know, have been used to cover fields. And there's a few of them in Edmonton and throughout Alberta with respect to covering fields and providing that opportunity from an indoor perspective. The secondary is a permanent structure which has the ability to provide some kind of outdoor feel through the removing of panels or roof sections and those types of things. But typically speaking, the structure remains in play for the majority. So not remove the air support structure, put it up on an annual basis. There's some structure that would remain 100% of the time. So first off, we looked at the air supported structure. As you can see, that's a quick illustration in terms of the existing pool building, what the air supported structure and orientation it would be related to the existing building. The air supported structure is basically filled up with air, so to relate it to a common, it's like a helium balloon basically, and it's anchored. It requires positive pressure within that facility. If someone leaves the door open for too long, then all that air rushes out and the tent starts to collapse, so the structure starts to collapse. So it's a good structure. It does work under specific conditions. It would require an additional connection to the existing building. So because of the type of structure it is, you can't cut a hole in the side of it and have the door to the existing building, change rooms as an example, lead directly into that pool covering. We would have to design something that would come back around the existing pool and into the positive pressure space and have a bit of a vestibule that allows people to go into the positive pressure space and then into the pool. Some of the things that we did uncover is the adjacency to the existing building. You can see in the pictorial there the snow load from the dome, which would be higher than the existing building, onto the existing building based on the structure and when it was built and the age of the building, likely could not support the additional snow load. And you can see the gap between the two buildings doesn't permit the opportunity for staff to clear around the dome structure. Typically, these dome structures do have a width around it so that you can get equipment around and remove the snow so that you can keep it clear, so you stop collapsing of the bottom layer of that support structure. With this one, it is one that can be taken up and taken down. The challenges with the existing building that we have at the pool, it's not likely that this would work under the current orientation of the existing building. We would have to probably do some major renovations to the existing building to make this option work. The more permanent structure, of course, most of you are aware that pre-engineering buildings, you can engineer them to do a lot of things, and it's basically a prefab building which you design it to do a specific duty, and then you erect it, and it continues to do that. So the benefit of this particular design is it could be pre-engineered to mitigate some of the snow load factors and cleaning around the buildings, and the ability to go between the existing building and then the new overall structure. It would be in place for a good period of time. It does have some mechanical advantages with the air-supported structure. You have to ensure that that humid air is removed from that particular space. So there would have to be some sort of mechanical system to replace while maintaining that positive pressure. As you all are aware, in a pool environment, the humidity is quite high. So if you don't have it at an ideal temperature, you could have snow falling, you could have ice and those types of builds, frost builds up in the facility if it's not maintained. And it also has to be at a warmer temperature to make sure that that humidity is taken care of. And it does reduce the outdoor experience because most of the support structure would be in place permanently. So some of the challenges that we found with the current pool structure, so not changing that structure and just adding something to it, is we would have to make some structural improvements. The building is 50 years old. The code of the day is different. The loading is different. And there was some concern raised with respect to what does the structure look underneath in terms of being able to support additional snow loads or additional loads that would develop or potentially develop based on the option chosen. The pool circulation is designed for an outdoor pool, and we would have to upgrade it. There are specifications for indoor in terms of drainage that we would, so that would require jackhammering the deck and replacing the plumbing. The other is the current operation of the pool is outdoor, so the piping is not to the point where it would be a winter operation. So we'd have to make sure that we had some sort of frost mitigation around the entire perimeter to ensure that the pipes would not freeze during winter operations. The chlorine room, that is on the north wall of on the south wall of the pool. That's how the staff get in and out and do what they need to do there. Under each of these, the the air structure would close off the access to that door, so we would have to make sure that we made some modifications to access the chlorine room. And the same thing would hold true with the permanent structure. So chlorine room does have to be accessible from the outside, and it has to be vented to the outside in case we do have a chlorine leak. We have to ensure that we can make sure we take care of the chlorine safely. And we would have to do mechanical upgrades for winter operations into the old building, and also ensure that whatever choice we chose in terms of covering, it met the ability for us to, again, take that humidity out and make sure that the pool is at a safe and comfortable condition for those that would use it. So from a cost implication, sorry, I did not put that slide in. So from a cost implication, as stated in our report, the air structure is in about that 1.8 million, and we're looking at about 2.6 to 2.8 for the permanent. That's high level. It's not detailed design. That's conceptual. That's just based on a square footage of what it would take to cover, based on what we know today. So we did have, as stated in the report, there were 3 different disciplines that went through the building, and they did an investigative review. They didn't cut holes in walls or in roofs. If they could access it, they accessed it and looked at the condition. Based on the building of the day, they made some assumptions because they do this for a living, so they can safely make some assumptions. But until you get into the detailed design and you start removing or demoing, that's when you understand the true aspects and relationships of what may or may not be there. Tonight, administration is putting 3 considerations for council. One is to pause any additional work with this and include it as a future strategic topic at our strategic plan sessions with council, which we typically do in January and June of each year. We could continue to move to a more, or include this as we move to phase 2 of our facility build out. We've got 3 phases with our indoor facilities, the first being the dry sport that we're currently engaged in. Second is the aquatic additions, and third is the ice additions. So with the second phase, when we move to that phase, this more detailed work could be completed to come up with some options in parallel to an aquatic facility that we've, in conception, looked at in our planning work. Or 3, council could choose to move to conceptual design. Basically, we take a 10% cost for detailed design based on the estimates. So looking at the higher value of the pre-eng building, the 10% would be about $270,000 to move to detailed design, which would be more exploratory and would come back with more options, and we would know more and more certainty around it. But based on the professional opinion of those that we engaged and those that looked at it, certainly what we have brought forward in terms of challenges would still exist once we got into that design work. Council administration is recommending that we delay and continue to talk about this at strategic planning sessions with council and talk about it more in more detail in that format. Happy to answer any questions, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you for your presentation. Members of council, any questions for clarity and understanding? Councilor Pletchko?
Yes, thank you, Worship. Great report. I'm just wondering for clarification why the tent structure was not considered. That was something that we brought back from a number of trade shows that we were at, that a number of places used, which are either aluminum or galvanized steel, which has a structural warranty with it, and it can be removed for summer. We looked at 2 that are really not feasible at all, and the one that we've seen at a number of trade shows seemed to me, the presentations that we had were feasible, and I'm just wondering why we did not see that in this presentation.
Your Worship, through the Councillor Pletchko, I would classify pre-eng to be a sprung structure, would be a pre-eng building for sure. The price range of which we looked at for a pre-eng building, it's not specific to aluminum clad. It was a pre-eng building that has some structure to it. I think taking a sprung structure up and down, yes, you can do it. I'm not sure that the feasibility of doing it and the cost related to is similar to an air structure, which is you can take down completely and you store it and you can put it up completely on a seasonal basis. So we looked at, the initial conversation with council was how can we duplicate what we currently have plus extend the opportunity for winter operations. With that, at one conversation we did present the air structure. Council did ask us to look at some other options, and the other options were pre-engineered versus traditional. Traditional is, as you know, it's stick-built and it's there permanently. The pre-eng, the opportunity to take some panels up, move them around, certainly we can do. The consideration of the existing building still becomes a bit of a challenge, regardless of the option that we might look at. Some of those other options that we have seen, you're correct, I have seen a pool underneath the sprung structure, but it was built specifically and purposely for that, and the supplemental buildings were built to complement the sprung structure versus us trying to fit a sprung structure on the deck footprint and the building envelope footprint that we currently have, which poses a bit of a challenge, which would mean we would likely be doing some major modifications to the existing pool office. And the snow loading, again, comes into play regardless of the structure, so we would have to be spending some money on that snow load component. So the cost window or the sliding scale on the cost, I think it holds true regardless of what pre-eng opportunity you might choose to utilize.
Thank you, appreciate that.
Okay, any questions? Deputy Mayor?
Thank you, Your Worship. I've got quite a few questions, and I appreciate the information coming back and the different concepts that were laid out. I'd be interested to hear, as we move forward, what could be done with that permanent structure to help maintain that outdoor feel. Because I think that's a big point of this as well, is that, you know, there is a certain level of that we wish to maintain while trying to understand our assets and how to best utilize them. So with that, though, I do have quite a few questions that I'm hoping can be answered tonight to help kind of guide my thought process as we continue on to this. So I'm going to start with the first one. Is you mentioned about the fact of the pool being covered and extends operational, et cetera. Well, currently, even with our outdoor pool, it doesn't guarantee operation. And so in inclement weather, lightning, et cetera, our pool cannot operate, whereas an enclosed pool could continue to operate. So I'm wondering if you can give us a bit of a synopsis of, from a seasonality standpoint, how many days a year is the pool scheduled to be open versus how many days the TLC pool is open? And as well, approximately how many days seasonally do we lose to weather closures?
Your Worship, to Councillor Laurie, I don't have those specific stats in front of me this evening. If you do require them, that would take some time to get back to you. Off the top of my head, the TLC typically closes for the month of September to do a major pool renovation, update, cleaning, those types of things. So from that perspective, barring pandemics, the pool at the TLC is open for 11 months of the year. Our pool typically opens May long. Weather permits. Of course, this year we had a delayed opening due to some other circumstances, and of course our cooler weather, it's unpredictable. Last year we had the golf course open early April. This year we're open 20 days later than we were last year. So the same thing happens with the pool. It's seasonal. Certainly from a rain delay, the pool stays open in the rain. People can swim, but when you get lightning and really cool weather, then obviously if no one's going to the pool, it certainly closes. But scheduled programs in terms of swim lessons, unless it's very miserable, swim lessons do continue on. If there's lightning and thunder, certainly there's a safety mechanism there, and we can't have that pool open, and that's for the safety of the patrons. The number of days that we might lose related to weather, I would have to chat and see with staff and see if that's tracked.
Excellent. And I think, you know, just a general synopsis of that is the pool is open approximately 4 to 5 months out of the year and closed for approximately 7 to 8. And during its open operational period, in periods of inclement weather, either being low temperatures or lightning, the pool is closed. In regards to the existing pool, given what we've been presented, it sounds like there would be a significant amount of work that would need to be done to upgrade some of the infrastructure, et cetera, that's in there. But I also believe that would likely come with an extension of lifespan on that infrastructure that is currently in place. Can you give us a bit of an idea as to what is the current anticipated remaining lifespan on the pool itself, status quo, if we chose not to move forward with any option?
We did have a condition report done on the pool through a different process, and it did come back as the pool is maintained to a high degree. There are some things that we needed to pay attention to and put on our work plans, but for the most part, there were no concerns about the operational condition of the outdoor pool. The report did not state whether we had 10, 15, 20, or 30 more years left in the building, but certainly there were no concerns raised on a 50-year building. I don't want to estimate how much life would be left in that, but the town of Stony Plain does replace and maintain and do what we need to do with the pool basin, with the change rooms, with the piping, the plumbing, our pumps. All of that goes through the rigors that need to be happening, and we do replace them as needed. So from that perspective, if we continue to maintain that life cycling, we might see that pool last another 20 years, or at least in that 10 to 20-year window. I think the block wall is probably the concern that we would have the most related to that. Our pumps might, we can continue to buy pumps. Those are small costs. It's when you start to get into the foundation starting to be impacted. Of course, that building is exposed to weather, and all types of weather. But the block wall is in good condition, and the architects that did look at it, or the engineers that did look at it, did not raise any concerns related to it. So from that perspective, we could certainly ask the question of what's an expected continued lifespan of that facility.
Okay, thank you. In relation to phase 2 of the recreation center, can you remind council of the previously estimated costs, high-level costs for phase 2?
Your worship, through to Councillor Laurie, based on a similar facility as this town of or city of Wetaskiwin, it was $35 million.
Sorry, sir?
$35 million.
And while we haven't got off the ground yet with our recreation center in phase 1, we are continuing to push forward with hopes that that will begin construction within hopefully the next year. I'm wondering if you can provide an approximate timeline on the current plans, understanding that that can significantly change based on council input, strategic planning, so on and so forth. But what is the approximate proposed time for phase 2 to be undertaken?
Your worship, again, through the Councillor Laurie, based on our offsite levy report that we developed, that is scheduled for 12 years after the completion of phase 1.
12 years after completion, and we're probably a minimum of 2 years out from completion, looking reasonably between approximately 14 to 15 years?
2036 would be 12 years after the completion of, the projected completion of phase 1.
Excellent, thank you. And this question is probably more for our finance section of our administration. The numbers that we're seeing, we're looking at ballpark approximately $3 million. I'm wondering if we can get a little bit of an idea as to if the municipality were to look at a $3 million debenture today, what type of a timeline, what type of a term would we typically look at on a $3 million debenture, and what would be the annual cost of that debenture, or the annual repayment of that debenture?
Your worship, through to Councillor Laurie, so I don't know that we'll be able to speak directly to that this evening as to terms and timing. A couple comments there. So, I mean, as of today, the interest rates are a little bit higher. I know that our finance team is looking at different ways of borrowing, so not what council may be considered, the traditional 20-year debenture borrow, but more flexible borrowing processes and so on and so forth. But Your Worship, I don't know that we can speak to that tonight specifically, I guess I would say.
Okay, so I'm wondering if maybe if we could get a little bit of a follow-up, maybe by email on that, Your Worship, would that be appropriate?
Yeah, it's just for if there was a $3 million debenture borrow. Usually, I think from what I've seen, is a 20-year debenture borrow length, and the question is, what would the payments be?
Sorry, Your Worship, I didn't hear that.
Payments be on a 20-year $3 million debenture borrow would be the question.
And then finally, Your Worship, the last question that I have for administration, again, I'm not sure how in-depth we'll be able to get on this tonight, but we've seen various debentures that have come up, some that have been more, I would call, by choice, others that have been by necessity. We also have our current self-imposed 80% limit on the town's debenture borrowing based on the province's limits that the province has set. I'm just wondering if there can be just a little bit of an overview of what our current and future debenture health is, and where we're looking at being, and what percentage of our debenture limit are we looking at over the next, say, 3, 5, 10 years?
Yeah, Your Worship, appreciate the question there, and I think you can see the recommendation in front of council. So, we've taken a look at this. We've seen both some of the opportunities, some of the challenge with it. Again, capital project, 3 million, 5, 2 million, numbers will move around a bit from time to time. But, part of the rationale to put this towards a strategic planning conversation is to, emphasize or understand the priority level of which council has to this particular project. To this point, we've put some time, effort, focus into trying to understand the impacts and what it would look like and what it wouldn't. And we've gotten a fair amount down that path now, but I do feel it's probably an opportunity for council to take this information, maybe get a bit more, and then look at it as part of the broader picture. So that's some comment there, Your Worship. I think I'll stop there. When we get into the borrowing, the debenture, the financing aspect, the financing models themselves that finance will come up with are oftentimes, trying to stay aligned with what council's priorities are. So whether that means dedicating grant funding, if capital money has been put aside, typically, as council has probably seen in the past, debenture borrowing is, often, the last choice. If there's other funds available, we will typically recommend those to council. So, Your Worship, again, I'll try to wrap it up there. Maybe a bit of a broader context answer, but I'll leave it at that if there's anything further.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Your Worship. And I'll just close with just some quick general comment. I asked these questions as aquatics was quite high on the list during the recreation studies that were done, and the need for additional aquatic space. And we noticed that in the summer, the pressure on our aquatic facilities certainly does not seem to be as high, which is funny because in the summer is when a lot of people love being in the pool. It tends to be in the months where our outdoor pool is closed that we start to really see that pressure and we start to really hear from residents. And while understandably, building phase 2 tomorrow would be a fantastic option, and I think our community would absolutely love it, barring the price tag, we realize that's not realistic. And I think it's prudent to look at the options that we do have in front of us, to take the assets that we have and understand how we can make them better, how we can provide better service to our community, how we can provide more options to our community. In looking at what I'm seeing here today, I'm seeing a fairly reasonable option in where we could significantly improve an asset in our community, or the usability of an asset in our community. And while it may alter some of that facility and what people enjoy in being the full outdoor experience, I think there are lots of ways that we can look at options on that to maintain at least a certain level of it. But the interesting point that I'm hearing is in regards to the debenture, and I kind of wish we could have got a bit of a better answer, but when we're looking approximately at this time, we'll call it 12 to 14, maybe 15 years off from phase 2 actually getting underway, I'm looking at, if we were to take that debenture over that period of time, it's probably a pretty reasonable payback, which would not have a huge burden onto our overall tax base, would increase and enhance the service and the assets that we have that we provide to our residents. And by the time that debenture is paid off, we are building the new facility, and the dollars that were being used for that debenture payment would essentially be able to roll directly into the debenture payment that would be required, or potentially required, when phase 2 comes online. So I'm glad that this report came forward. I'm glad we're talking about adding it to the strategic planning session. I think there's a big conversation to have around this, and I'm really looking forward to that.
Okay. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. And just in terms of your comment, we're just here to ask questions for clear understanding. The last few bit were commentary that probably needed for if there's a motion on the table to debate, if we decide which direction we want to go. So right now, we're going to ask questions again of council for clarity understanding of the presentation of numbers that are presented, and try to keep our comments until there's actually a motion on the floor. Any other questions and comments regarding the presentation? Councillor Anderson?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I appreciate Deputy Mayor Laurie's questions because they almost verbatim some of the ones that I came in with this evening. And so I appreciate, him taking the time and the responses there. I just want to take it, maybe one more question on top of that in terms of the lifespan. And the comment was made this evening about the exposure to the elements of the pool and the effect that that has on the lifespan of the facility. If there were to be a structure, built over that space that was in place over the winter months, would that extend the lifespan of that facility?
Your Worship, through to Councillor Anderson, the short answer is likely yes, because we're going to remove the element impact. The long answer is we have to understand the relationship of the existing building being covered by a new building and what other environmental impacts would that have on the building, i.e. if you're closing that and it is exposed to the chlorine environment full on versus right now the chlorine environment does not impact that building because it's swept away by the air. In an indoor pool, it's quite corrosive. Simply because you're using a chemical for sanitization in order to allow people to bathe in your pool, the water splashing, it's quite labor intensive to ensure that the rusting and stainless steel and all the different types of elements you need to use to ensure that that structure and the supplementary pieces of that building can stay intact and really function in that harsh environment. That level of investigation was not done. That level of understanding was not taken. So in theory, it's covered. The elements aren't hitting it, but there's other environmental elements that likely would impact that building that at this point, we don't have any comment on what those might be and how quickly it might start to deteriorate that building.
No, perfect, thank you. I appreciate that. And just generally, appreciate the report that came forward. Was a little bit lost when this first came through in terms of, what the options were and how they would play out, but see a lot of opportunity in what's been brought forward this evening and how it aligns with some of our further discussion around recreation opportunities in our community. And so I look forward to further discussion on that. And, short of, I know there were other hands to chime in here, but would certainly be willing to move this to a strategic planning session to discuss further. So.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hanson?
I love the idea that we're looking at how we can make the pool more usable through a longer part of the year. I found myself reading this for this evening's meeting and thinking, my goodness, the most expensive option here seems to be, maybe I'm looking at it backwards, but anyways, option 2 seems to be a better answer for me. However, option 2 is about 20% of the cost of the new facility. If the new facility, a new pool, indoor pool, was to be built today at $15 million. Before I take correction, I'll make my statement. I read in here that $15 million is the cost of a new pool element in the new multi-pod community recreation center. If I need to be corrected on that in a moment, please. Where this option becomes about 20% of that cost, and I'm going, why? Why? Because that cost of a facility to house a pool down the road will certainly be greater than $15 million. Over and over and over again, we see to postpone a project does cause the project to be more expensive. However, I realize we can't bite every opportunity off and chew it at the same time. So we have to take things in elements. I'm just wondering if there might be out there, not that the administration hasn't done a good job coming up with these, if there may be a third consideration that would not mess up what we have, but offer us another opportunity for indoor pool use. And then, of course, I'm always concerned about what participation we are likely to get from our regional partners in the face of everything new in the way councils are wanting to be involved in sharing costs. So it's just something I wanted to put on the table as a concern of mine. I'm glad we're going to talk about it in a strategic planning session. I would not be prepared to vote on anything more than adding it to a future strategic planning session as one of the items we'll take under consideration tonight. But giving us this in segments helps us to digest it rather than get hit with everything all at one time and having to make a decision. Because right now I would feel ill-equipped to do so, and I don't want to be ill-equipped when I'm making decisions, hopefully the right decisions, for the people and taxpayers of Stony Plain.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Hansard. And again, I want to remind members of council, this is questions for clarity and understanding of the presentation that was made by administration. No comments about extending life. Is there something that you need clarity and understanding in the presentation?
Just wondering, I know, were there other options?
We will have that conversation and debate if the motion is put on the floor. And if it does get to strategic planning, that's another conversation to be had. Right now, we had a presentation from administration of what was presented to us. And please keep those questions and comments for clarity and understanding. Then you can ask those comments or have those questions after we've accepted the motion. Then at that point in time, we can deal with those questions.
Your Worship, it's not on the agenda later.
Because I haven't accepted a motion yet. Councilor Hansard, so we had a presentation, and then I haven't asked for a motion yet. So right now, we're asking for questions of clarity and understanding.
Okay.
And I mentioned that when Councilor Lawyer, Deputy Mayor, let him a little extra leeway there. He asked some good questions, and then he had proceeded to add additional comments and stuff, which was not required at that time because it was not a question of clarity and understanding.
Understood.
Councilor Pleshko.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I appreciate that we're trying to get this back on track. So my simple question is, if we were to move this to a council strategic planning session, what time frame are we looking at that could become part of the council strategic plan? Is that something that could happen this fall, this next spring? What is the thought process by bringing this back to a council strategic plan, which I think is a good decision?
Your Worship, I'll certainly comment there. So the timing would be like this January, as council's aware. It's generally, I think those dates are set, so it would be brought up there as a topic. And Your Worship, through the rest of council, I think the intent there would be to have council work towards the prioritization of not just this, but other projects. Council is generally probably aware that through the strategic planning process, those priorities are set. Some of them are capital, some are process related or what have you, but the notion would be we've cleared off a number of priorities, frankly, coming in from 2017, 18, 19. A lot of those council priorities have been addressed. As we move into 2023 strategic planning meeting, we will be looking for council to identify the next, I'd say, lack of a better way of putting it, the next wave of priorities. And Your Worship, again, just for clarity, that's one of the things we'll be asking for. We've gotten a certain amount of information. We have enough to make, some, I would say, better educated understandings of this particular project. But like this project as any, how does it fit within the larger scope is what we look to do this January. And then from there, how it rolls through.
Thank you for that. I do appreciate that. The package that we have seen tonight is a good package. It's created some great interest. There's been some good conversation about it, but it's something that needs to be taken a bit further. So I'll look forward to hearing what everybody else has say tonight and look forward to where this may end up.
Okay. Any more questions for clarity and understanding from the presentation? See, now I have a question. Administration provided 3 options for council. One was to add this to a council strategic planning session, which council kind of had the conversation. That's why it was directed to administration to bring back some options. Second option was to continue to go ahead with this and spend $270,000 to do whatever, and then the third option was to go ahead and secure it, I believe. What are the three options again? Can you put that back up, please? Right, so there are the three options, and all three of them more or less delays this project further. We had a good conversation at strat planning a couple years ago when we looked at this, and we directed administration to spend the time and dollars to bring this forward. However, coming forward and reading what was in the package, and then spending a lot of time up at that area this year, just checking on the Francophone school that's getting built there. And speaking to a lot of the attendees that are using the outdoor pool is that they go to the outdoor pool because they love the outdoor pool. Not the fact that it's covered, not the fact that it has to shut down in the wintertime. There's feelings of history there, that they went outdoor swimming there, they want their kids and grandkids to go there. And look at the dollars and cents. Can there be a fourth option if we just say, you know what, we spent the time already. We had strategic planning, and we talked about this, and we brought it up. That's why it was in motion. That's why it came back today. Maybe it's time to say, you know what, we've seen the numbers. For $270,000 to do an estimated detailed design, is it better to put $270,000 to phase 2 construction to speed that along? Instead of being 12 years out, it's only 10 years out. So is there a fourth option that we can put that says, you know what, thank you for the information, we're done with this. Now we're going to do something else and accelerate some of our other projects.
Your Worship, certainly if you want me to speak to that particular question, the answer, the quick answer is yes. That would be an option of council if council so chose to go that way. I'll just stop there. Yes, the answer is that is an option.
Okay, so the answer is yes. I appreciate that because there is a lot of options that we have to talk about as a council. And definitely, this is, we have to value this. Is this a priority of spending this much dollars at this point in time for something, or do we take priorities for something else? And that may be a good time during strat plan, but those members of council that were here last term, we had that in-depth conversation. That's why the motion was put forward, and that's why we had the information forward. Councilor Pleshko.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I appreciate where you're coming from. However, I truly believe that this has been a priority of council. And I truly believe that what we're seeing here today is administration not listening to what council asked for. And I think it is worth the conversation to look at further. I think this is something that, it's an option for our community. My family spent a ton of time this summer at different locations throughout the communities, and we found a number of our residents leaving our community because of the pool. So you may talk about the pool in a positive aspect, but I can tell you a number of our residents go to other places to have the convenience of different pools. So I think this is an opportunity for us to still continue on to build on something. This is not something that we want to drop, or maybe it is at a strat planning we decide to drop that, but this is a really good opportunity for us to see where the opportunity lies within here. And maybe we need to be more specific as council when we're talking about strategic planning, is to give administration specific details. I asked about a specific detail tonight and got it kind of covered in a different version of it, but we see nothing of that aspect in this presentation tonight. So I think there's a great opportunity, and I've heard most of council today talk about something that would be well received within our community. We would be able to extend the life of a pool that is something that we really need to have within our communities. Parkland, Spruce Grove, and Stony, it was the #1 priority on our plans, and yet it is something that we're sitting here talking about scrapping. I struggle with that. I would not be in favor of that, and I will speak very clearly about that. I think it is important today that there is an opportunity for us to have more in-depth conversation, and really I believe that strat planning is a great place for it. Tom, you made relations to needing more things to do within our community, and here's a great opportunity. It gets passed for another few months. We've already gone for a few months to it. If it's a few more months and we have it back in strat planning in January, and we're able to see this back in-house in April or May, there's still opportunities where 1 year opposed to a 15-year thing where we're going to have it. So I strongly encourage everybody here today that we do not put this and take this off the table. It's something that's important for our community. It's something that's important for our region, and I do believe having it covered would warrant some support from our two communities within us.
Okay, thanks for that question for clarity and understanding. Well, it's kind of where your question and clarity went from too, so. Councilor Anderson, I'll ask you to make the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will make the motion that Town Council add the covering of the pool to a future council strategic planning session agenda. And I'd like to make some general comments there too, if that's okay.
Go ahead, you can do it right now as the mover.
Thank you. There are some options that were presented this evening, and an option that I do really like, and that I think would allow the extended use of a recreation amenity in our community to 11 months a year. I know the challenge that it is to book students in for swimming lessons as a school, and how limited we are in the options that are available. And if we don't get in that first wave, that option doesn't present itself to us. And so I do think there's a great opportunity there for us to provide a service to our community. Having said that, I do appreciate the commentary about the nostalgia of the outdoor pool. And I have pictures of myself as a little one at that pool, jumping in and swimming around and that sort of thing, and certainly have fond memories. But I think we need to look at the cost benefit as well and what it brings to our community. And if that means that it needs to be enclosed to extend the season year round to allow families to do that, I think that, the cost that's presented to us, is reasonable, especially when we look at the time frames of our rec center project and, the possibility of 2036 as phase 2, which is the next pool. And we're talking about the lifespan of this taking us right to, that time and potentially longer. A $3 million cost versus a $35 million cost can open up a lot of other opportunities. I know that wading pools and spray decks and these sorts of things are well attended by community members. And maybe there's an opportunity here with, and enclosing the existing pool to look at adding some of those other amenities into our community as well. And so I like the idea. I like what's been presented. I do think there's opportunity for further discussion, and I think we can come to, agreement with council that would serve our community well.
Councilor Anderson. Councilor Loynes, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I'm sorry, but I'm going to go slightly off topic from covering a pool just because I don't know the previous conversations. But instead of looking at covering a pool, was it ever an option to look at raising the temperature of a pool and using it almost like a hot spring? Like, I know BC has natural hot springs and that's where the heat comes from, but would it be more cost effective to raise the temperature than only on super cold days when we're minus 40 for a week, then not be operational? Instead of talking coverings and tents and structures and this, that, and the other thing.
Okay, I guess technical question to administration. I guess the biggest question is the infrastructure able to take up the extra heat and deal with the freeze-thaw cycle in the winter?
Your Worship, through to Councillor Loynes, based on what we've found, likely we're going to have to put in a frost wall so that it doesn't freeze from the bottom up. Raising the temperature certainly would turn it into a hot springs. There's a different operational model I'm not aware of. I've not operated a pool at 32 degrees, which is likely a hot tub type. I don't know if our pool would sustain the ability to do that, and it would certainly eliminate the opportunities which I think Council is trying to achieve with putting a cover on it in terms of extending swimming lessons, allowing people to do their lane swim and those types of things. I think when you get to those hot spring type temperatures, which you see in Banff, it's a sitting pool versus an active play and an active program pool. So I think you'd be opening up And a lot of those are fed naturally with some water and supplemented with some sanitization.
I was thinking like the Fairmont one where they have the one section with the diving boards, people swim freely in it. The other side they use for lane swim, and then the more of the hot tub is more central, right? It's kind of where my mind had gone. So.
It's certainly something we would have to look at further to see if not covering it, what implications that would have in terms of the operations of the facility.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor?
Thank you, Your Worship. And just to follow up on Councillor Hansard's comments, the only cost in regards to the new facility that was mentioned in the report was actually for phase 1, which is our field house at $15 million. So it's unfortunate that phase 2 wasn't actually mentioned in the lead sheet, because that would have given us a little bit more of a comparison as to what we're actually looking at when it comes to aquatic costs. Then, one thing I did find interested that was mentioned though is that there's currently approximately a 30% increase to all of those costs, those construction costs, based on the current economic climate. And so when I'm looking at the potential of phase 2, originally estimated at $35 million, if we take the estimation, I'm using again a ballpark figure of $3 million, which is a little higher than what's in the report, that $3 million, as far as I understand, is current dollars, is current day dollars. So that would be including that 30%?
Your Worship, through to Councillor Laurie, that's based on what we currently know in terms of square foot price. That could change tomorrow. Yeah.
For sure. And so that's current day costs. And so if you actually adjust the $35 million of phase 2 to that 30% that was mentioned in the report, it actually brings it to a little over $45 million versus $3 million, which is 6.6%. It's quite affordable. As Councillor Anderson said, I think this is a great opportunity for us to look at a solution that we can implement in the short term that will provide us with a mid-term improvement of the service we provide to our residents as we look to achieve our long-term goal of the construction of a brand new facility. And as I mentioned earlier, I think there's a great opportunity. You know, we've seen it somewhat with the original debenture on the Tri-Leisure Center. When that debenture expired, rather than eliminating that from the tax base, we were able to take new initiatives and allocate that to those because they were a benefit to the community without adding anything additional into our community at that time. And where I see is if we look at a debenture term, very similar to when we anticipate phase 2 being ready to go or phase 2 being under construction, we could actually look at taking a smaller portion of the debenture right now, improving, increasing, enhancing the service. By the time that debenture was paid off, we are incurring a larger debenture, but it would actually have a smaller impact on our tax base as we would be able to move the dollars that were previously allocated for that debenture forward. So again, I think there's a much broader conversation needed. I'm glad we've had the conversation we have tonight. I do feel that our strategic planning session is probably a good place to put this because we do have a lot of competing priorities. And we need to look at everything on a wholesome view, not just as a singular item, and determine what's the best course for the entire town and everything we have on the go.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments regarding the motion? Go ahead, Councillor Meyer.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Admin, for taking the time to thoroughly investigate these options. When it first came up, I thought, great option, you know, extending the life of the pool and all the rest of that, and still saving the great draw of having an outdoor pool. I think tonight we see that the sprung structure just has too many challenges and costs to make it a practical solution. In my opinion, the permanent covering option, the prefab option, basically we're covering the outdoor pool. Why don't we just build an indoor pool? It kind of just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. We're trying to make a good idea or a good thought, and then we're just ramming it into this, you know, round hole, square peg, round hole. It's a good idea. We're going for it, but it's just not going to work, in my opinion. So after listening to things tonight, while I'm prepared to, you know, join council at a strategic plan and continue to bat this one around, in my opinion, like the mayor said, I'm prepared at this point to say, nice thought, wish we could do it, It's not practical. We're even getting to the point now where we're discussing the practicality of covering an outdoor pool, and it seems crazy to me. Not to be offensive or to downplay anybody's thoughts there on that, but you want to cover an outdoor pool when we're looking at further down the road, building an indoor pool. We're trying to do too much here. It's just not practical in my opinion. So that's my wisdom to add to the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Meyer, any other questions, comments, and debate on the motion? Councilor Petchko?
Thank you, Worship. Just one more comment. I think there's a broader picture to look at when you're talking about what we're doing. Nobody here, I have not yet heard it once. What is the other opportunities for that building once we do not need it anymore? We talk about rugby clubs, soccer clubs, different places needing certain things, facilities within our community. We have a building there, fill the pool in and make it a shower room, make it a meeting room, make it a number of things. So we're not talking about building a building, in my opinion, that is put it up and in 10 years take it down and build a new pool. We're talking about a building that could be used for multiple things within our community. And I think that's something that we're going to get in a strat plan, is the options that we could do for a number of things with it. So I think there's just some more topic to be had at a strat plan. And maybe at the strat plan, we decide that you're absolutely right, Eric. Maybe it is something that we no longer want to do within our community because it just can't be done. So, but it does warrant, or at least I feel it does warrant a little bit more. We can't just decide that tonight is the night that we scrap the whole idea. It's been on a council chambers for a number of times, and it's a topic within our community right now when you go out to places. So, you know, if you don't explore all the options, how do we justify what we do in the best interest of our residents in our community?
Right, any other questions, comments, debate on this? You know what, I made comments earlier. I think this was a great idea when we first initially talked about it as strat planning, maybe extending the life of the pool. But the whole idea was to extend the life of the outdoor pool and make it more usable on the front end and the back end. The idea was never to have a fully covered outdoor pool for 12 months of the year. It was, how do we extend the season so that we can take some time and some pressures off the TLC. Looking at the presentation that was brought forward to us and the options, that doesn't address it. There's no happy medium. That's why my suggestion is like, well, if it didn't address what we needed to do as council, then maybe it is time to not talk about it. But maybe it is. You know, at strat planning, we will definitely, as a council, look at the priorities we have in our community, some initiatives that we have going on, and the limitations of how much money we can borrow, how much money we can safely debenture borrow so that we can build the things that we need to do. I will support this motion. I look forward to different concepts and further conversations of this at our strat planning. Councillor Anderson?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Council, for your thoughts and comments and feedback. Just want to, close the discussion, I guess, with this, and that's ideas evolve, and they evolve all the time, and our projects change and take on, different capacities and different feels and different amenities and all of these things. And so, although the discussion was to extend, the season into the shoulder seasons, there's an opportunity here to look at a year-round facility that would serve our community for the next, 15 years. And I think we need to do our due diligence in having that conversation. I'd encourage council to vote in favor of this motion. I think it gives us time, to go to our networks and our communities and our neighborhoods and ask questions, of the residents of this community to see what their thoughts are, especially with how far this idea has come. And so, again, I encourage council to push this to strategic planning so that we can have a continued discussion with, again, that input of our community. So,
Councillor Hanson?
Clarification, Mr. Mayor. Are we coming out of this meeting on this subject with the idea that we're sending our general manager and administration away to do a lot of extra research and come up with some other things they can put in front of us at strategic planning? Or is this really kind of going to go to bed right now and council will resurrect all these ideas under admin's direction when we get to strategic planning? I just hate to think we're boat-loading research projects onto our admin, and to what end? Because I heard multiple sort of ideas here tonight, and a number of people spoke that things are not what we talked about tonight in this agenda. So can you clarify, please?
Okay. Councilor Hanser, so the motion is that the conversation of covering the outdoor pool will be brought back at a strategic planning session. So,
Does admin go away and do a lot of homework to that end?
I know that'd be a conversation for council to have, because right now I think the reason why it's back here is because administration has gone as far as they can with the direction that we've given them. So usually at this point in time, when we've given direction to administration, they'll come back either yes, go ahead and continue to do it, or no, don't do it. Right? But they gave us an option. Well, let's talk about it a little bit more. Right? So obviously the motion is to talk about a little bit more.
Okay.
Is that clear? Okay. Call the question. All those in favor? Okay. And that's carried. Let's take a recess and we'll come back here in about 10 minutes. Administration. We're moving back to our council agenda, 9.3, which is the 2022 second quarter report. Go ahead, Administration.
Thank you, Your Worship. Again, quarterly reports, operation updates, so on, coming to the chambers once a quarter. Typically, it'll be a week or two into the next quarter. In this particular one, it's a little bit just based on the council schedule or whatever. We're little ways from the quarter we're reporting on here. But Your Worship, as per usual, lots of good information in there, stats, numbers, and a visual presentation that, as much for council update, certainly accessible to the public to have an understanding of what the town's been up to in the previous 3 months. Your Worship, I'll stop there. Certainly, we're prepared to, provide further commentary or context or answer any questions council may have.
Okay, thank you. Members of council, any questions for clarity and understanding on that? As the town manager said, there's lots of good stats in there. Councilor Hansard, I'll go over to you first since you had comments.
Couple of comments. One, two parts just stuck out and hung in my mind after I read the Stony Plain Fire Department report. I was quite impressed that I'm sure it's not the only time they check fire hoses, but 5.3 kilometers of fire hoses were tested and then remounted or whatever with all the machinery and the vehicles that they belong on. And I thought, that's pretty impressive. Is that a measuring stick for fire departments, how many kilometers of hose you take care of and look after in order to fight fires in the region? I loved reading that part of the report. I loved all of it. And also, I was struck by the volunteering, the report that was written about volunteering, where 326 volunteers filled out a questionnaire, and 89% indicated that volunteering makes them feel important and connected to their community. Well, isn't that what we tell them when we want them to volunteer? Every one of us sit on boards and committees, and we often find ourselves trying to recruit people to those communities and encourage people to step up. That was a beautiful thing. And also that 98% of those that filled out the questionnaire said they believe that their volunteering made their community a better place. I just want to mention that because volunteers are worth their weight in gold. They give and give and give until it hurts, and most of them continue to give. So I just wanted to point that out. I loved all the quarterly report. I feel like I'm now officially caught up on town business after 4 years' absence. And thank you very much for all the work that goes into those reports. I remember a day when reports would come back as beautifully done as these, and some council members, not these of course, but some would say how much money was spent on putting that together because it was so professional. The quarterly reports are professionally done. I personally do appreciate them. No question in there, your sir.
Thank you, Councilor Hansard. And then they are professionally done by our in-house staff.
I know, it's wonderful.
Which is good. Any other questions for clear understanding and comments on the second quarter report? Councilor Meyer, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I too appreciate this report. It gave me lots to consider. One of the little brainstorms that it gave me, I was reading the golf courses report, and it made me wonder, does the golf course have like an open house evening where we would maybe try and draw in some more of those youth golfers? I guess that's through you to administration, Your Worship.
Good.
Your Worship, through to Councillor Meyer. Actually, we had a wait list for junior golfers this year, and they actually added more opportunities for junior, and I would suggest with the strength and the ability for, or the demand that might be looked at again next year in terms of increasing those numbers. Very healthy junior program.
So just repeat back what I think I thought I heard. not necessary in terms of needing an open house. We have lots of demand already, so no problem filling those times.
Correct, yeah, it's a very healthy program.
Perfect. I have a couple more. Going on to the enforcement side, I'm noticing that of the 590 odd incidents, about 1 in 6 of those incidents are proactively generated. So it's maybe 2 questions. One, how many additional incidents could our enforcement handle before we would need more resources in that department? And are we looking to, or could I expect those proactively generated incidents to increase? So that's 2 questions.
Your Worship, through to Councillor Meyer, through our corporate plan process, we do have additional assets for enforcement as a consideration. So you will see that in November. Certainly the self-generated, so self-generated is the officer through their patrols notices something that needs some attention and they create a file related to that. So how many more could they put on their dashboard? Their dashboards are quite full as it is related to that. I think they do try to generate a lot of those particular types of files versus complaint basis. If we can get out ahead of things, it mitigates a lot of phone calls and a lot of back and forth that we have to have with complainants. So generally speaking, I think they would prefer to do the self-generated versus the complaint, but we have close to 18,000 residents. Often the complaints will outweigh the ability for us to do those self-generated because there's certainly a lot of things that we do respond to from time to time and day to day.
And thank you. And just to add a comment to that, I think a lot of our residents would also appreciate and do appreciate the community protective officers self-generating. I think that's something that our community is looking more of. Finally, just last question, because I've seen a lot of graffiti, an uptick there. I'm just curious, in the report it mentions tracking and monitoring. I was wondering if maybe admin could expand on, I imagine there's some video cameras involved there, but how do we go about tracking and monitoring?
Mr. Mayor, through to Councillor Meyer, certainly recently we've had a very common tag, so a spray paint on garbage cans in different places. On Monday morning around the town office, it was the same tag on several different locations. The mayor provided us some video from his wife's store in terms of tagging happening behind there. Our CPOs certainly reach out and go and look and see where the tags are, and they reach out proactively to either the business owners or public. The RCMP do have a program where you can register your doorbell cam or any cameras you have on your property, and if something happens in that location, we're able to reach out and ask if we can get some footage related to an incident that might have happened around a specific time frame. So there's a couple ways that can happen. We did get some video and some very clear video, and at this point I'm not sure where the investigation is, but we certainly do have an active investigation. The community police officer that Inspector Locken provided us information about tonight, our CPOs work with them, and often they do have files generated in parallel to us. So working together sometimes increases our opportunity and our ability to tackle those quicker. So we are working on it actively. Not sure that there's a resolution, an immediate resolution, or an immediate identification of those that are doing that particular tagging right now.
Okay, thank you.
Your Worship, if I may, I'll jump in a little bit on the graffiti questions. There's a couple comments there I guess I would like to put in front of council. For one, certainly if you see stuff to let us know in whatever method you choose or is the simplest for you. The second thing, I will say I continue to be proud of our operations staff for their level and attention and getting onto it as fast as they can. Sometimes if there's a prolific graffiti individual out there, it can be tough to keep up. They can hit however many spots in one particular night. But I know the general manager mentioned we had some stuff on, I think it was August long weekend here around our building. And, frankly, Tuesday morning, staff were out there getting it cleaned up, cleared off. So it would have been a day and a half kind of thing that it was on. And, that's a really good thing that it, sits into our staff at the operational level, that's important to get that down as fast as possible. But I also want to thank them because, the truth is that can be frustrating for them personally. They're often asked to go to the exact same spot, within a week and clear it off and clean it off again. And as you guys, as council's well aware, our staff take a lot of pride in the community and the work they do. And good on them for getting to it fast, and also some gratitude for the frustration that can go along with having to go back to the same spot sometimes over and over. I think frankly, Your Worship, I've noticed our skate park sign, our newly skate park sign has been hit more than a few times in the last little while since it's gone up, but I know I travel that road pretty much every workday, and I know our staff get it down pretty fast from there. So appreciate the question, the comment. It's something we do our best to get to as quick as we can.
Any other questions, comments regarding the quarterly report? Councillor Anderson?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, administration. I always love reading through. There's so much to stay on top of, and I feel like I'm always missing pieces. But these reports always help me feel like I'm starting to catch up, which is awesome. So thank you for that. Just looking at page 125. So these are our fire department response statistics. I'm just wondering if administration can flush out a little bit the 25 medical calls that our fire department responded to. Specifically, I'm curious if this was, dispatched as well as EMS, or EMS wasn't available, so fire was dispatched. Just looking for a little bit more commentary there.
Your Worship, through to Councillor Anderson, I can't provide you that this evening. I would have to go back and ask the specific details to all 25 calls with respect to, was it a fire department response only or AHS plus fire department, and what level of medical call was it? So I don't have those stats or those file details, so I'd have to get back to you on that.
Sure, and I appreciate that. The reason I ask is we continue to see deficits in Alberta ambulance, and just curious what the impact that's having on our region, and what that looks like for our fire department as well. So thank you for that. And then second, just jumping to page 129, looking at some of our facility usage stats, which in some instances are 20-fold from 2021, obviously an increase with changes in COVID restrictions. My question there is, have we returned to pre-COVID usage numbers?
Your Worship, through to Councillor Anderson, I think we're nearing and getting closer for sure. Definitely at Heritage Park, we have a lot of interest in terms of that facility and the opportunities it can provide. We're doing a bit more promotion with respect to that. And certainly I think the uncertainty with restrictions that COVID brought, people are more committal to renting a facility of that nature at the cost of which it might take. And a lot of our larger events are back and have been back in full force this year. So it's certainly increased our ability to utilize that particular facility. And I don't foresee any restrictions hampering us this winter. I think we're learning to live with COVID-19. So certainly I think there might be some impact for individual rentals, but the ability for people to rent and the desire for people to rent is on the rise.
Oh, that's awesome and so great to see, and being able to attend events at those facilities. It's great to see the community back together and those facilities used again. So thank you for that.
More questions? Councillor Loynes?
Thank you, Your Worship. I just noticed going through it that there was nothing about our town ambassador program. Are we going to get that in Q3, or was there any updates in regards to that?
Through your worship to Councillor Lawrence regarding the Tourism Ambassador Program. So we have conducted the training, I believe it was in May, with the folks that were registered to participate in the program. So that's underway right now, and I believe the intent would be in the Q3 report to provide a summary of the results of that.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Okay. Just a question to Armin regarding the CN rail safety theory. I think that's one of the questions that was brought up, that with the amount of trains that are going through our community now, do we feel adequate to address any issues that may arise? So during that two-night training session, is our fire department, I guess, better equipped to handle any emergencies that might arise from CN derailment, an accident, etc.?
Your worship, my understanding is CN brought in their cars that they would bring for fire departments to practice on in terms of learning how to disengage an engine or turn off an engine or deal with the locomotive component. And they brought several different types of rail cars that might provide different hazards in our community that we might have to address. Of course, the size of the rail cars that come through and some of the hazardous materials that might be on it, sometimes evacuation is the only thing that we can do versus a very targeted or active approach, or sorry, trying to look at the term, or remember the terms from when I used to be in that industry, but certainly you're not going to rush into something if you've got an ammonia car that's leaking. Certainly it's make sure we're doing. So I think the fire department does learn and understand exactly what's happening with those rail cars. And some they can get close to, some they can't, and there's a multitude of ways that they can actively or passively attack or take care of some of that rail incident.
Okay. And in terms of rail safety, I know a few years ago, the federal government passed a law which made rail cars or companies to provide municipalities what's going through the communities. However, that was such a huge lapse, so it may come through a community and we won't get the information for like 90 days later. Has that time narrowed so that we actually have a better understanding of what's going through our communities?
Your worship, there's a couple of things that happen related to that. We do get a manifest that throughout the month that will tell us what's on the rail cars. It's sent out to us. I believe the chief also has an app where the rail car is coming through. They can just type in the rail car, the number on the car, and it'll actually tell them what's in that particular rail car. So I think there's several things and several tools that the fire department uses to ensure that they're well informed with respect to what's going through our community, or if an incident does occur, how they should best handle that incident.
Your worship, too, I'll just chime in a little bit there. So yeah, you're referring to the manifests that have to be provided. Those are, past, they are looking to the past. They come out periodically, but they're an update as to what has passed through your community, not what is or may or will, tomorrow or the day after.
Okay. Council question?
Yes, thank you, Worship. You brought up an interesting part too, an evacuation. What does that look like for a community? Sometimes you have all but minutes to get that out to our community. How is that communicated out?
Your worship, through to Councillor Plechko, I don't believe we have a siren that we can hit. We do at the golf course. I believe that's where the old siren from the fire department went. From that perspective, we have emergency alert, which we do through our emergency preparedness week to ask citizens or residents to sign up for. With the emergency alert app, you can specifically pick Stony Plain or other communities that you want to be receiving the alerts from. So that's one tool that we can use. The other tool, of course, is the old school tool of driving around the community and asking people to evacuate, which often happens when emergencies hit with no notice. Short of that, we don't have anything specific that without people subscribing to, i.e. the emergency alert, where it would ping someone's phone automatically. The province is switching to more of a national alert system in terms of if something was happening in Stony Plain, you hit, and it'll automatically come to your phone regardless. So similar to what happens in the States. If you're, right now, if you go and you have your roaming on and something's happening in Texas and you're in Texas, because you're around that cell tower, your phone will be notified that something is happening. So timely, I'm having a meeting on Friday with the switch over to that new system, so we'll understand more about that. But my understanding is that national system is moving towards more of that FEMA notification system that's happening in the States, which will improve our opportunities and ability to send out more mass notification regardless of if you're a resident or passing through Stony Plain or visiting. If your cell phone's connected, it's likely going to ping and tell you detailed instruction as to how you should be reacting to this emergency.
Thank you. Any questions more? Looking at page 126 in terms of the community standards graph, I know definitely, being Q2 and Q3, we'll have a lot more complaints generated through long grass and unsightly properties. Q4 and Q1 in terms of ice and snow removal. Again, looking at the number of tickets that are generated or issues that we need to look at, looks like between unsightly properties and long grass and weeds, it's about 80% of the total calls that we're addressing last quarter in terms of community standards. Do we have like a frequent flyer program where if one property's been hit 3 or 4 times, that the next time is they automatically get the citation and notice, like so they don't have that grace period of, you have 2 weeks to address this, and then if, come talk to us, and then we'll work with you to get it done. But after if they've been notified a couple of times, and then this is an ongoing issue from year after year, is there a policy where there's a frequent flyer? We just push in that property, ding, 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 ding. Last 3 years they've hit it. 4th year there's no time frame. It's done.
Your Worship, certainly there's a couple of approaches there. I would have to confirm with our bylaw, but I do believe we have an escalating. If you have 3 or more violations, it's a higher level. The other component too is we do, like you say, have some frequent flyers or people that we frequent often every summer. Our CPOs do the passive knock on the door, say, hey, here's the expectations, those types of things. We also have to follow legislation too with respect to it. Our bylaw is one thing, but we also do have a legislation in terms of our ability to go into a property and provide action for correction without notice. So we certainly do have to follow the legislation so that we're making sure that we're doing things above board related to providing the property owner the opportunity to correct the challenge themselves versus us immediately going to correction right off the hop. So a couple things at play there that certainly the tools that the CPOs use, we try to encourage it not getting to that point and not having the frequent flyers. But certainly there's some properties that we pay more attention to, and the timelines are narrower and narrower as the years pass as they continue to be consistently on our list of attention.
Thank you. I just want to make another comment. I just appreciate seeing that our peace officers are still doing and participating in teaching the dare class at the local schools. A lot of communities do not have that. I think that's just a valuable asset that we do in our community to make sure that we try to teach our younger generations of how to be resistant to drug and alcohol abuse. So appreciate the staff still continue to take time to do that. Right. Councillor Hanser for the motion, please.
Your Worship, I move that Town Council accepts the 2022 second quarter report for information.
Thank you. Members of Council, any debates or questions on the motion? Okay, seeing none, call the question. All in favor? Okay, that's carried. 9.4, and that is the Q2 strat plan and corporate plan report. Go ahead, Administration.
Thank you, Your Worship. For your information this evening, included in the agenda package is the progress and status report for the strategic plan of 2022-2025 that was approved by Council in March, as well progress report on the corporate plan initiatives identified and approved by Council in November 2021. one as well. And so just providing an update on the status and progress of those items, and would be happy to answer any questions council may have with regards to what's included in that tonight. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Members of council, you have the report before you, so obviously you read it. Questions, comments? Councilor Laurie?
Thank you, Your Worship. Page 154, right at the bottom of the page, under Community Development, there's the key action of working with CN Rail, particularly on the construction of a second pedestrian crossing and a vehicle overpass. So what I believe is referenced in the update is in regards to the pedestrian crossing and not an overpass. But I just wanted to ask a question. I know we originally looked to apply on a grant. They came back, said that we needed some more information. If I'm understanding this correctly, then we have now gathered all the required information to apply on that grant, and that's been completed. When do we anticipate a response in respect to that grant?
I'll just ask the General Manager of Planning and Infrastructure to speak the details of that. I believe the application for the grant was submitted just recently, and so perhaps he could provide some further information as to that.
Thank you, General Manager. Your Worship, through the Deputy Mayor, we did successfully apply for the Rail Safety Improvement Grant. I believe it was a month, don't quote me, believe it was a month ago. The timelines for hearing back are not expressly said in the response back from the acknowledgement that we got. We don't have an anticipated timeline to hear back from Transport Canada exactly when. We did put forward a very good application in this time. We did have the support of a consultant to help us develop the plan. So it is our best foot forward, so to speak, in hopes that we can get a more favorable response in this time.
And for clarification then, that grant is to undertake the design and engineering and costing for that pedestrian access, correct? Not the construction.
Your Worship, to the Deputy Mayor, the grant would stipulate if we are successful, there would be the engineering, design, and costing as you referred to. However, there would be a commitment to doing the construction at a later time.
Excellent. Thank you.
Councilor Kletchko?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Your Worship. Page 159 of 165 at the bottom, we're talking about a broadband strategy report that we were coming back. I noticed that there's a substantial over budget on that, and I'm just wondering what has changed in the report from the 55 to an additional $14,000.
Your Worship, through to Councillor Palechko, I would have to get back to you with regards to the details of the overage. The information is not coming to mind at the moment. The overage was reviewed as part of the procurement and was consistent amongst all of the submissions that were made, so it wasn't an anomaly. And we were able to reallocate operating surplus to address that, but I can certainly provide further information to Council as to the details of what the overage was at a later date.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
Any other questions, comments? A question regarding page 152. Where is it? I'm really glad that TELUS is doing the pure fiber install within our community. Just one question, because it seems awkward that the town of Stony Plain is releasing all the information of what's happening versus TELUS releasing that information and the town just resharing it. Because it looks like it's our project because we're the face of the information going out through emails, through everything else, instead of TELUS releasing that and we just resharing it because it's their project. We have $0 committed to this project.
Your Worship, thank you for the question. Similarly to some of our other infrastructure projects, larger infrastructure projects that affect the community broadly, and I would reference the upgrade work that the province did on Highway 779 through the community. The town has taken a position to proactively support the partnership of that work through by communicating the details and the updates, because we often receive the questions from the public as to the status of the work. There's an assumption that it is part of a town-led project because it's happening either adjacent to or on the town property. So we try to proactively share that information, but we do articulate specifically in the updates we provide that it is a TELUS-led construction project, similarly as what we did with the provincial highway upgrades on 779, so to try to distinguish to the public who is the lead on those upgrades.
Thank you. Any other questions? Go ahead. Councilor Meyer?
Yes, thank you. That Town Council accept the strategic plan and corporate plan Q2 2022 report for information.
Okay. Any debate on the motion? Okay. See, now before I call the question, I just want to make this really comment for our residents and for the members of the people that are in our gallery. If you want to know what the town Stony Plain is doing and how we're advancing in our corporate and strategic plans, having the quarterly updates, even if you don't follow anything else, read the corporate plan, read the strategic plan, and read the updates. You'll have a good idea of where the town is heading. So I think that was one of the best things that we've started doing, and I point a lot of residents to, is those 3 documents will give you a pulse of what's happening within the community. Thank you. Call the question. All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Moving on to information items and council discussion. Councilor Plechko.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Just a couple of things this evening. Interesting to see whether we want to call this 628, 79, or 779, the construction sign that's gone up along that road. I'm just wondering if you could give us a bit of an update as to what is actually going to happen on that road.
Sure. Thank you, Your Worship. I will just ask our General Manager of Planning and Infrastructure to speak to that project.
Thank you, Town Manager. Through your worship to Councillor Plechko. You are correct. The work they're starting to mobilize out to that location. What residents could and council could expect to see is over the next few days some notifications going out in and around Rosenthal. You'll start to see some equipment being mobilized and parked alongside. Once work begins, there will be periodic lane shutdowns as they do a similar style of work as we did on Golf Course Road and 49th Ave, where they'll be rehabilitating by recycling the old road and repaving it. It will take this will take approximately weather dependent, probably about 2 weeks from start to finish, assuming that they don't hit any snags, which we've done a lot of work to try and avoid. Then we'll have addressed the worst parts of 79th Ave by the end of it.
Thank you for that. Quite excited to see that actually happen. There's a number of times I've had a number of calls regarding that last portion of it pretty much coming unglued pretty much. Will that be any wider? I've had a number of residents in that neck of the woods wondering if there's going to be room or it expanded a little bit so that anybody riding their bikes up and down that road, which there is a number of them, will have a little more room. And really don't rush the group that's doing it. It might teach people to slow down on that road a little bit. It has become a bit of a drag strip over the last months. So yeah, any delays I'm quite excited to see.
Your worship to the Councillor Plechko, there is no intention to widen any section of it. This type of work really puts the road back to where it was in a better condition. To widen it would require we couldn't just we couldn't do this type of construction method that allows us to do it so expeditiously. We would require a different it would require a different approach and just something that's not currently in scope. Is a comment that we could take away for future considerations, seeing how we could better improve our active transportation facilities across town, including this location. But for this project, that's not in consideration.
Thank you for that. I would suspect that from Range Road 10 forward, there's a decent width of side part there. So if you're bringing it back to the standard that it was, I suspect there's going to be a bit of one which will give that bike lane. So I guess we'll see as we go forward. I'm pretty excited to see that. If I could, one more thing. So a few months back, council approved a park within our community that was kind of something new in the Silverstone area. And since then, I've had a number of residents call me wondering if we're going to name that park. And if we're going to name that park, how that process would look or what it would take for a name to be put at that park. Is there any thought from administration on creating possibly a contest or something like that within our community that might be able to get a name put on that park for that neck of the woods?
I could certainly speak a bit to that, but maybe not in absolute detail. But so, you know, naming whether it's parks, roads, so on and so forth, council's likely familiar. A fair amount of that happens, you know, through the ASP and then design processes, and you know, you end up with typically a developer will make presentation and so on. I think council's generally familiar with that. When it comes to like naming, you know, what would be considered like historical areas or like historical parks, like something that doesn't have a name. We do have some processes for that. And certainly you can direct, you know, individuals to, you know, to administration to walk through that process. Essentially, people are able to, you know, put forward names, suggestions. They get reviewed. If they fit, you know, generally speaking, it gets put on a list. Council has to approve that overall list, I believe. I'm going a little bit from memory here on the naming policy. And then once those that list is approved, then it goes, you know, into the queue and can be assigned to certain areas. So I guess what I would say is if there's people that are interested, yes, we do have a process for that. They can be put forward. Council can also do that through that process. I'll stop there, Your Worship. I'm not sure if there's, I mean, more further. That's the basic overview. There is a process that guides naming of parks and, you know, recreational amenities and so on.
Thank you for that. So just in further, you mentioned that there is the process for that. What department is that through, and who would those people contact for maybe initiating that process?
Yeah, the policy itself, I'm sure, is on the internet or is on the website somewhere. And we've, you know, I know we send a few of those out every once in a while from time to time, but it's generally going to be handled through planning and infrastructure. Correct. And the other thing I'll add then, just for council's perspective, so. Traditionally, historically, whatever you want to call it, there are a lot of unnamed parks in Stony Plain, whether they're, you know, recreation or somewhat active recreational sites or MRs or what have you. There are quite a few that are unnamed, and I believe that policy, I'm just got it here beside me, you know, that part of the reason I was put in was to start to, you know, maybe build a bit of an inventory of names. That you know, future council at such point in time can you know, allocate or name things as they see fit at that point. So,
thank you for that. That's all for tonight, sir.
Councillor Lawrence.
Thanks, Your Worship. This Thursday, we have both the Fall Info Night at the Tri-Leisure Centre and the Indoor South Field from 6 to 8, as well as our final Culture Campfire from 7 to 8 at Chickawi Park. And just a reminder that school starts on August 29th and 30th, depending on which school. So just to watch for kids and buses and drive careful.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Your Worship. A couple of things this evening. First that I'll start with, because notice it's still a bit of a challenge at some points this evening. I'm wondering if administration has an update on the council audio system. We know that's been a challenge at times, and again, there were times this evening where either trying to hear presenters or fellow colleagues, it's very difficult.
Your Worship, through to Deputy Mayor, we are currently going through a procurement process to seek quotes for upgrade services, and we're looking at timing for an upgrade to the audio system later this year when we have a period of time where there's a recess in council meeting to conduct those upgrades. So we will share more information once we have sorted out a vendor and some time frame with regards to that.
Excellent. Thank you. The next one I have, Your Worship, question for administration regarding Veterans Boulevard. I know there was some conversations that went back and forth, notices to council in regards to the weeds and that it actually hadn't been turned over to the town yet. There was still a contractor responsibility. Notice the contractor actually came out and replaced all of the dead sod on the west side of the road with new sod. They've been out there watering it. It actually looks quite good. But the center medians and the east side of the road are still completely dead, barren, etc. Is the contractor trying this to see if this works before they undertake the entire project, or is it being done in phases? I'm just curious as to if we'll see the same action occurring in the medians and on the east side.
Through your worship to Deputy Mayor, you're correct. We've been working with the contractor to impose their obligations upon them to close out this contract. I myself have noticed that they have more of a presence out there in terms of rehabbing the areas that we've identified as deficiencies. To your question of the medians and the other locations, I would have to follow back up with that because they will only be going to areas that we previously identified at the previous inspection as a deficiency. So I'm speaking broadly because I don't know the exact details of every single spot. It is a big project. I could follow up with that with an email about where their focus is going to be and why or why not we are not focusing on other areas, as you noted.
Certainly. The condition of both the west, the center median, and the east sides of the road were the same. And so that's why I'm very surprised to see that there was remediation taken on the west side, but nothing in the center and nothing on the east. So if we could get a follow-up on that, that would be great. I did have a question for administration centering around where Councillor Palechko had spoken about in regards to the land along South Park Drive, 44th Avenue, and what's next. That did go through the process for the land use bylaw amendment. There were some decisions made. There were some prospective options as to what could be done with that land in regards to parks and recreation amenities and so on that could be added to that. And so I'm just wondering if administration can give us a little update as to what is the next process in that. We did do some good public engagement. We got some good feedback from the public. We have that data and that information now. What's the next step?
Yeah, Your Worship, certainly I can speak to that particular question about what happens next there. So what I would say, we haven't absolutely flushed that out, so to speak. But what I would say generally is that administration would have to come to council and seek clarification on that particular aspect. So if I can maybe try to quickly explain this, with what may be considered administrative logic or process logic. So administration was directed by council to provide, a business case, as council's aware, and, highest best use sort of aspect. While at the same time to continue some road work design and understanding the cost for the road. Council directs the zoning change. What is also apparent then is that that's silent, frankly, on direction related to any recreational changes. So what I would say, maybe a short answer, is that we would continue to anticipate road work, finish up that work, look at it in the longer term capital plan, so on and so forth. But until directed by council to seek specific recreational park space upgrades of sorts, we would not do that. So it would require a specific direction of council to add that into planning, to take a look at it, so on and so forth. I'll stop there, Your Worship.
Thank you for the update on that. We did collect some good data in that public engagement. I definitely don't want to lose that, so maybe I'll have an offline conversation with administration as to how best to bring that back forward then to make sure that we look at what our options are there, timelines, etc. Further, they use this opportunity to plug back in 2020, council did create the significant names registry. And and I don't believe that there's a name on that yet. So, we've got a good opportunity. If anybody has some recommendations, some suggestions, some nominations, strongly encourage our public to get those in. We want to recognize valuable members of our community, and we have lots of opportunities to do so. So I really hope we can see some names added to that list. Nothing that needs a verbal response tonight, but maybe a follow-up in an email. Did get contacted by a resident that the swings are missing at the park in Willow Park, and looking for an update as to when those might be replaced. And then, as well as Councillor Loynes mentioned, just the first day of school coming up next week. I think there's probably a couple days given the different school divisions that we have operating. So just everybody be careful. I know we usually have our CPOs and fire department out at the crosswalks, so looking forward to seeing them out there. And I know I've got at least one of 3 at home that's excited to go back. So doing pretty good if I got 33% of them ready to go. So that's all this evening. Thank you, Your Worship.
Councillor Anderson?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate Councillor Laurie bringing up, or Deputy Mayor Laurie bringing up those swings. That actually came up a few months ago, and I'm surprised to hear those swings aren't back yet. So would appreciate hearing what's going on there with the swings in Willow Park. Other than that, welcome back to council, to administration. I know have been busy over the summer as well, but coming all back together, it's great to be back. And to our families, I know this has been spoken to, but back to school. So to our teachers, tag, you're it. I know they're excited to have your kids back in class.
Thank you. And the wings in Willow Park, I inquired about that as well, because I walk by there just about on a daily basis and drive by there, and I believe it was a safety issue that was been taken down for a little while to see if, I guess, usage changes, etc. Let's put it that way. Councillor Hansard?
I only have one thing, and that's I missed everybody on council and administration. Not before all my years on council did we have such a nice break in our council meetings, and I think that's because you guys rearranged the schedule so we could breathe. I really appreciate that, and I did miss all your lovely faces.
Thank you. Anything else? No. Okay. Councillor Meyer?
Thank you. Thank you, Your Worship. I too am suspicious of what Councillor Hansard wants.
That's why I asked anything else.
Yeah, I know. Very quickly, I would just pass along my kudos to administration. I heard a lot over the summer about the Thursday pop-ups. I'm not even sure the whole word there.
Midsummer Thursdays.
Midsummer
Thursdays.
Thursdays? It's not midsummer pop. Anyhow, that was well received. I also heard a lot about the cultural campfires. That was much appreciated, and by the sounds of it, well attended too. So kudos to administration on that, and I missed you guys too.
Thank you, Councillor Meyer. Yes, definitely it's nice to be back and to see everybody's bright and smiley faces. I didn't miss you guys as much as the previous 2 speakers, but I did miss you a little bit because you're my council family for quite a few years right now. Question to administration. On 51st and 50th going southbound, there is a stop sign in that intersection that is on a power pole. So it's just a little bit off than normal. And some residents complain about that it's because it's off a little bit, that people are not seeing it as well and tending to run it more often than not. I've noticed that we've had an increase in our safety in terms of high-vis signs. Can you check in to see when that area will be updated to have high-visible signs?
Your Worship, pardon me. Your Worship, just to clarify, so on 51st and 50th, you were saying that there's a power pole on, or pardon me, there's a stop sign on a power pole.
Yes.
I almost said that backwards. And then you're at, if I heard you right, there's a crossing there that you're wondering where is on the prioritization for high visibility signage?
Not in terms of a crossing. So usually the intersections they have their own pole where the where the stop sign is. This one doesn't have their own pole, so it's just moved in a little bit.
Yep.
So it's on the power pole itself. So I think some of the drivers are seeing that sign because it's not out a little bit further. So I was wondering, because we're upgrading them to high vis, so they have the lines and they have the yellow strip on them. You know, when does that area get done so that the visibility is a little bit more?
I'll have to follow up with you in an email, and I will take a look at that one.
Okay, thank you. And then in terms of the Westwich Curling Club site, I've seen that there's some work that's happening on there. Can administration provide us an update, please?
Your Worship, I believe you're referring to the construction work that we're filling the site in with gravel. Yeah, that's we're trying to address the site, I guess, to make it more usable for parking and I guess just to take it away from its current state with where the Cardigan Club's footprint used to be.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much for administration for the presentations and doing all the work for us. Thank you for council for reading your packages, and it is good to see everyone and having that conversation. I did miss all your smiling faces. I definitely miss the camaraderie and the ability to talk about things, debate things, and then still leave here with a smile because we're here for the best, what we believe is best for our communities. So with that, we are adjourned.